The Scandinavian is one of those openings where you respond to white with an attacking move. You control the game. Today, I'm going to be showing you all the plans in the Scandinavian, every opening move, the middle game ideas, the tactics that appear, everything to help you to get better at chess. Watch the full video and watch your ratings go through the roof. Kicking things off in the 500 region, once they play e4, we play d5. This is the Scandinavian defense. They take the pawn, we take with the queen, and usually people play knight to f3 here. I've seen so many persons checking with the queen. Don't be doing weird stuff with the queen. Just move your queen to a5 so that way the opponent is not able to attack the queen anymore. And then we're going to be using a very simple setup that you can learn on chessreps.com where we develop the knight to f6, develop the bishop to f5, pawn c6, pawn e6, knight d7. d4 is the main move. Here we play knight to f6. And my goal with this knight to f6 move is to ensure that I'm able to castle my king on the king side. But then if I play pawn to e6, I'm going to be blocking out my bishop. So I'm going to play the move bishop to f5 first, not bishop to g4. Because if you play bishop to g4, he's going to play h3, and you do not want to be moving the same piece more than once. We already developed the queen too early and moved the queen more than once. So even when they play this bishop to d3 move, do not take their bishop. Just play pawn to e6. Because if the bishop takes our bishop, we're going to be taking back with the queen. And our queen is actually very safe on f5. He castles the king. Now, in this position, you could choose to play c6, knight d7, or bishop e7. It's the same move. All I want you to do is to know your setup. Once you know the setup, everything is going to be appearing very, very easy. So let's put the bishop on e7. Just just so that we were able to castle the king. D6, knight d7, castle. Now, one thing you guys are going to be seeing a lot in the Scandinavian, and unfortunately, my low rated 400, 500, 300 guys will be falling for this. The bishop is going to go to d2 on the same line as your queen. You're going to forget about it. They're going to move the knight, and you're going to lose your queen. It's fine. Just don't let it happen more than once. Rook to e1 was played. We're going to play the move pawn to c6. Because remember, if the bishop takes, our queen will be able to take. Whenever the bishop goes to d2, you put the queen on c7. The bishop is on the same line as your queen, put the queen on c7. That way you won't lose your queen. What you're going to be noticing against the Scandinavian is you're not going to be moving like a bunch of pawns. Knight e5 was not a bad move because now he's basically messing up the communication between my queen and my bishop. So if I just castle, he's going to take my bishop. And if I pull the bishop back to g6, he's going to take with the knight and has the bishop here, which means now is when we're going to be taking his bishop off the board. I want you guys to notice how my king is also not yet castled. The Scandinavian is one of those openings where you actually don't need to immediately get your king out the center of the board because there's no immediate way for the opponent to break open the center of the board. However, let's just castle the king. Now is a good time to castle the king. My plan is to play rook to d8, put my rook on the same line as the queen. This knight is going to be going to d7. This rook is going to be coming to c8, and then we're going to be playing pawn to c5. Like, if you know that, you know the Scandinavian. Now, because we're playing against players at the 500 level, obviously, they're going to be playing moves like d5. What I recommend, like, let's just say they did not blunder the pawn, right? Because I want everybody to learn from this. Even if this pawn was on d4, there are certain times when you put one of your knights on the d5 square, and when they take the knight and it's time for you to take back, I want you guys to take with the c pawn, capture towards the center of the board. It will also allow your rook on the c file to get open, and that's going to help you out a lot. Yo, what is this guy doing? Bro, not only did he donated a knight, the knight was also just pinned to the rook. So now I'm going to take the free rook with check. He has to block with the queen, and then I'm going to take the queen off the board. The king has to take, and then I'm going to take the knight, and I'm going to be ahead by like 50 points. It's crazy. Now, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. That's a free knight. We're ahead by 8 points and move like 14. The Scandinavian defense, I think, please, I don't care. Maybe let me know in the comments what you think. But I think the Scandinavian defense is more solid than the Karakan. And yes, please start the debate in the comment. Let me know the lines. And the Karakan, you have to know the tal, you have to know the exchange. And I'm not saying that the Karakan is bad. Like the Karakan is good. I already made a video on the Karakan. But I'm talking about solidness. I think the Scandinavian, when played like this, is more solid than the Karakan. So if you're a solid player and you want a solid opening, I think you should play the Scandinavian. And it's crazy. It's actually crazy. Okay, so he plays knight to d7. This guy's just giving me all of his pieces. This is something that you need to learn. Like, don't just move your knights forward if you don't know how you're going to be pulling it backward. Because he basically just played knight d7 to attack my rook. Once I move my rook to d8 and attack his knight, that's it for the night. It's over for the night. But because there's nothing else really to learn from this game, let me continue with my rant. The Scandinavian is very, very solid. It's like the Scandinavian is like the London system with black, but it's not the London system because obviously we don't like the London system. So you play very, very solid. He gave me the knight. You know, there's nothing to learn from this game. So let's just talk. He gave me the knight. I'm attacking his rook. You play very, very solid. He's about to get checkmated in two moves, by the way, because I'm going to play knight c3 and attack his rook. He's definitely going to be moving his rook. And then because my knight covers the e2 square, moving my rook to d1 is going to be a checkmate. But the Scandinavian is like the London, but it's better. It's more solid. You play with the black pieces. You play solid moves. The opponent makes the blunder. You punish them for their blunder. You win the game. And just like that, that's a checkmate. More Scandinavian at the 600 level. Stick around. Our opponent is now 600. E4 was played, which means we're playing the Scandinavian defense. Once he takes the pawn, we take with the queen, knight c3. You notice they do this very quickly because it's what they always do. But we know to put the queen on a5. And from here, we're going to be using a very, very simple setup where, okay, bishop to c4 is a development move. We're always going to play the move knight to f6 first. And then after we develop our kingside knight, the goal is to develop our dark squared bishop. But if we play e6, e6 will be blocking out our light squared bishop. But then the opponent plays queen to f3. Now, one thing I want to tell you guys is the Scandinavian can be an aggressive opening and a solid opening, and it all depends on how the opponent decides to play. So, for example, now that he plays this weird queen to f3 move, we're also not allowed to develop our bishop because of the drawback principle. For example, if we develop our bishop, he's just going to take on b7. With that being said, though, we're just going to play the move knight to c6 because now we're able to play moves like knight to d4 or knight to e5, which would be forking both the queen and the bishop. So he has to be a bit careful about what he plays now. Knight e2 was played, and I want to play knight e5 to fork his queen and his bishop, but he is able to play this queen to f4 move, and he would be safe for the time being. I mean, I could get the bishop here though, so that's definitely an argument. I'm thinking of playing bishop to g4. Yeah, let's go bishop to g4, gaining the tempo on the queen this way, and then we're actually going to be castling on the queen side this time around in the Scandinavian. So as we climb up the ELA, we're playing against stronger people, you're gonna notice that we play moves like e6 and c6 and castle on the king side, and then play the move, play the line very solid. But if the opponent decides to get their queen out early or just do weird stuff, then that's where we can actually switch to the aggressive side of the Scandinavian, where we play knight c6, queen side castling. So the queen does not have a lot of squares to move to. That's one. I'm assuming he's gonna move the queen to g3. That's what I'm assuming. Okay, but then he moves the queen to e3, which is not a good score for the queen. I think his queen is a bit compromised on e3 because I'm able to play a development move in the future and attack the queen. For example, castling is definitely very logical, but I would love to develop my dark squared bishop and attack the queen. Where do I put the dark squared bishop though? That's the question. I'm thinking c5, because if I'm able to put the bishop on c5, it immediately attacks his queen, and that's another tempo. So I'm thinking of e6 or e5. I don't think it matters too much. Well, I think it does, because if e5, there's d4, and then I'm going to be forced to castle. And then if he takes, okay, then I go bishop c5. Yeah, let's go e5. E6 was also perfectly playable, by the way. I'm trying to trap his queen. If you notice, his queen does not have a lot of squares to move to. Like those are only the squares that I'm seeing that the queen is able to move to right now. So if he's not careful, that queen could get trapped. And it's crazy because we're the one playing the Scandinavian. We're the one bringing out the queen early and moving the same piece more than once. So he decides to castle his king. I'm thinking of just playing bishop c5 now. Yeah, let's go bishop c5, hit the queen. Let's force the queen to move. If he plays queen to d3, I may play knight b4, hit the queen, or rook to d8. Queen to g5 or queen to g6 is what I'm expecting. He did play queen to g5. My goal was to castle on the queen side, but because he's threatening my g7 pawn, I'm thinking of just castling on the king side. Yeah, let's just castle on the king side here, just to be safe. His queen is also unprotected, so he has to be careful. And I'm actually trying to find a tactic where, because his queen is unprotected and is on the same rank as my queen, I'm trying to play moves like e4 to do a discovered attack and win his queen. Okay, so he plays knight to d5. Very interesting move. What he's basically saying here is my knight is the main defender of my bishop. So if he's able to remove my knight from guarding the bishop, then he will be able to take the bishop. So it's not a terrible idea. Let's just get rid of the knight though. Once we take the knight, he takes our bishop. I'm thinking of just okay, that was not the move, bro. Come on. Like I thought he was cooking, but no, he made a drawback blunder because the bishop was guarding the knight on e2. Now the bishop is no longer guarding the knight on e2. So all I need to do here is to take the knight on e2, and just like that, we're ahead by a piece. What? 10 moves into the aggressive Scandinavian? I want you guys to keep in mind at the higher level, you're going to be playing the Scandinavian very solid. At the lower level, you can play it super, super aggressive. And based on how they play it at the higher level, you can also play it aggressive. So he plays d3, no intention of guarding the rook. You know, these are the types of chess that I'm expecting at the 600 level, though. So let's just grab the rook. Now we're ahead by an entire rook, like an entire 5 points. So now the goal from here is just to convert our advantage into a win. Now, I have a very nice idea here. Very nice idea. So, I want you guys to notice how I have what is called the X-ray on his bishop, and the bishop is unprotected. My queen is on the same line as the bishop. The bishop is unprotected, which means the moment I move my bishop, his bishop is going to be under attack. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take on f2. And if his king takes on f2, I'm able to take his bishop. But if he thinks he's able to play bishop takes e6, trading the bishop first, then taking my bishop, that's actually a terrible blunder because queen to e1 immediately ends the game in checkmate. So I am expecting him to just take my bishop and then I take his bishop. And then in that case, we're going to be ahead by 6 points. Oh, he took on c6. So he's like, I'm going to take on c6. And then once he takes back, we take on f2. But nah, bro, that's not how it works because that's just a checkmate, but more Scandinavian against 700 players. Stick around. Now, just to show you the exact line that we're going to be learning today, this is chessreps.com, by the way. We play d5, the Scandinavian defense. Whenever you make an incorrect move, it will tell you that you're wrong. Queen goes to a5. We develop the knight to f6. Bishop goes to f5. And then from here, we're going to be using the similar setup where we move the pawn to e6, then move the pawn to c6. There are 26 of these lines that I already studied. If you want to get all the lines, get chessreps.com. Let's get back to the video. Our opponent is now 700. We're playing the solid Scandinavian. Knight c3 hits the queen. Let's move the queen out the way. And then after d4, we play knight f6. Like this is how it works. And from here, it's all development. Knight f3, we're going to play bishop to f5, not bishop to g4. And the reason why we want to take out the light squared bishop first is so that way we're now allowed to play e6. And then it's going to allow us to get our dark squared bishop out. And whenever you see them play bishop to d3, which you are going to be seeing this a lot, you don't necessarily need to take their bishop. Just continue with your idea. Because what we want them to do is we want them to move the same piece more than once in the opening, especially since we already moved our queen twice. So we're trying to get back some tempo here. So he took on f5. Let's just take back on f5 with the queen. And from here, the goal is to finish our development. He's going to castle his king or develop his bishop. I mean, that's what he should do. He castles the king. Very good. Now I'm going to play the move pawn. I mean, I'm thinking of pawn c6, thinking of knight d7. I'm thinking of bishop e7. And I've said this many times. It doesn't really matter exactly how you play it. Like, I'm trying to see if there's a way in which, okay, you need to develop the bishop first or you need to play c6 first, but it really doesn't matter, to be honest. For example, let's just go knight to d7 here, because this knight is not able to go here. He's not able to play d5 just yet, and that's the purpose of playing c6, by the way. If you have a pawn on c6 and a pawn on e6, it's going to be impossible for them to play d5. And if it's not possible for them to play d5, then it's going to be harder for them to get to your king in the center of the board. Now he plays a4. Now I'm 100% sure that he's trying to play knight to b5 and then fork on c7. Now once I play c6, I prevent his little knight b5 idea. Now I'm going to play. Okay, I'm really contemplating between putting my bishop on e7 or putting my bishop on d6, but my opponent basically made it easier for me. As I'm telling you guys, he's really trying to get one of the pawns on b5. So he decided to play pawn to b4, but you are going to be seeing these types of blunders when you play the Scandinavian, because that's just a free pawn. Now, I want you guys to think of the Scandinavian. It's kind of like the London, but it's not the London. You know, we don't like the London. It's you play very solid, you get your pieces out, you know exactly where the pieces belong. And because the opponent does not know how to respond to it, and they do not have a specific pawn break that they're going to play, then it basically caused them to make a blunder. So we're already ahead by a pawn. Let me just get my king out the center of the board. This bishop to d2 move did not really do too much. Rook to b1 is definitely a try, because what he's trying to do in this position is to skewer me. What I mean by that is, if I move my bishop out the way, he's going to be taking my unprotected b7 pawn. So there's two moves that I'm thinking of here. The first move is just pawn to a5, just guard the bishop. And then he moves his knight somewhere and I play knight d5 and just keep guarding the bishop. Another move I'm thinking of is queen to a5. Not only am I guarding the bishop, I'm applying pressure to his knight twice. Once I apply pressure to his knight twice, however, he goes knight e2, I takes, maybe queen takes, I take this pawn, he takes on b7, and that's definitely better for me, but I'm not trying to lose my b7 pawn, to be honest. So let's go with pawn to a5. Let's just protect the bishop. If I have to lose it, then so be it. But I don't want to lose it. I'm going to play moves like b5 and roll my pawn up the board. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind when it comes to the Scandinavian is you don't necessarily have to play a lot of pawn moves. You know, once you get the structure that we already discussed, you're now looking to play moves like rook to d8, you know, rook to c8. Then you may want to play c5 to open some lines for your rook. But it's not a case where you have to try to know some pawn storms or anything like that. So knight to h4 was played. Perfectly playable move. It attacks my queen. I almost thought my queen was trapped, almost, because my queen is no longer able to go to a4. So I was looking on the position and I'm like, wait, where do I put my queen? Do not get your queen trapped when you're playing the Scandinavian, by the way. But let's just go queen to g4. That's the only square for the queen. And I'm ahead by a pawn in this position. So the goal is to definitely trade the pieces off the board. Once the queen takes, my knight will take, and then I'm just gonna be fine with the extra pawn, basically. And for all the persons who are always leaving comment that saying, I don't know what to do in the end game, please make end game videos. This is about to be an end game video. Well, he didn't want to trade the queens. And that's something that I noticed with lower rated players as well. Like, they just don't like to trade queens. I think it's because they're not good at endgame, which is why I want you guys to be good at endgame. Because if you're good at endgame, then you're going to be playing persons who are afraid of trading queens. And that's already a little psychological edge that you have. So here's what we're going to be playing now. Well, I'm thinking of knight d5, which is the natural move, but let's stick to principles. Let's try to be as principled as possible. My rooks are the pieces that are just not participating in the game. So let's play the move rook to d8, putting my rook on the same line as the opponent's queen. Because now I have some ideas of playing pawn to c5. And then if he takes, my knight takes, and then my rook gets the file. And I want you guys to keep in mind, whenever you play this rook d8 pawn c5 move, it opens two files. So he pulls the knight back to d2. Once I take here, my b7 pawn is going to be under attack. So definitely need to be careful there. I'm thinking of knight d5, but he will play pawn c3. So let's just take on d2. And then once the queen takes back on d2, I need to not lose my pawn. I'm thinking of playing the move knight c5 here, though. But knight c5 seems too risky. I mean, obviously he's not able to take due to the pin, but what if I play knight c5 and he just moves the queen? That's my issue. Okay, let's guard our pawn. Let's move the pawn forward. The knight guards the pawn. Let's guard the pawn first. We're still ahead by a pawn. This is a very active rook that he has, by the way. The rook is on the file and it's applying pressure to my backward pawn. My plan from here is still to play c5. I'm thinking knight d5, knight f6, and knight will always try to go to some scores like d5 and then to f4 if you're playing the Scandinavian. H3 was played, was definitely expecting that move. I have to move my queen. It's very important that I move my queen to not only a safe square, but to a square where it's not very easy for him to attack my queen again. So I'm thinking of h5, and if knight g3, then I go to d5. I was thinking of e4, then knight g3, then I go to d5. But if I start on e4, he could play knight c3. So let's play queen h5, so that way he puts his knight on the king side, then I scoot over my queen on d5, and then he's not going to have easy ways to attack my queen anymore. And I'm still thinking about this pawn to c5 move. So we're still staying very, very solid here. I was actually expecting that knight to f4 move, but now I'm going to play the move queen to h6. I wouldn't say it pins his knight because his knight is able to move. If he moves the knight, he's also not going to lose his queen. But if he moves the knight, then I get to trade the queen. And then if I trade the queen, I go into an endgame where I'm ahead by a pawn. So I'm going to have the advantage there. Now he plays rook to b2. It's definitely an idea. He's trying to double up his rooks on the b file to attack my b pawn, but my knight will always be guarding the b pawn. So I'm safe there. I'm thinking of e5. E5 hits the knight. If he moves the knight, I takes, then I take. I'm also thinking of c5. So e5, knight goes back, trade the queens off the board, then I take here. And then once his knight takes, though, I'm not seeing what I have. Maybe I should play c5. Let's go c5 instead of e5. Maybe if he plays c3, I'll take, then play e5. Because I have to be careful when I move this knight, because remember how the drawback principle works. The moment I move this knight, I may be leaving my b pawn unprotected. So once I move my knight, I want to ensure that it at least attacks something. Okay, king to h2 seems to be like a waiting move. If I takes, queen takes, pawn e5, not a 4, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5, I'm trying to find a way to win this pawn. Well, this knight, because the queen is the only defender of the knight. So if I could remove the queen from guarding the knight, then that would be good. And if takes, knight takes, e5 is a 4. Takes, queen takes, knight c5 hits the queen. Where would he move the queen? Hmm. I'm also thinking of playing e5 here as well. But let's take. Let's take so that way my rook gets the file. I'm thinking of playing the move rook to c8 so that way all my pieces are active and is playing a role in the game. But I think I have to be a bit quick here. But after queen takes, rook to c8 will definitely be a move. But because his queen is going to be on the same line as my rook, I'm trying to see if I could take advantage of that. I'm not seeing it though, but let's see. Queen takes d4. e5 is not a fork. He is able to take. Queen takes d4. Knight c5 hits the queen. Oh, he did not take. I think I'm having deja vu. Because I've literally seen something like this before. He plays rook to d1. Now I'm just ahead by 2 pawns, bro. That was a weird move. Like you really did not have to play that move. Okay, what if I play knight e4? No. Knight e4 hits the queen. The queen has to stay guarding the knight. The only square where he could move the queen where it has to guard the knight is the c1 square. And if the queen goes to c1, taking on f2 is a free pawn. So yeah, we're definitely going to be going for that idea. Let's go knight e4, hit the queen. And then obviously, if he moves his queen to any other square that is not c1, then the queen will no longer be guarding the knight, and we're going to simply take the knight for free. So let's assume that the queen is going to go to f1. And this is something that you guys need to do. Like, I just did a lesson with a student and he was using the word hope. He was like, okay, I'm going to do this and hope he did that. So then I was like, don't use the word hope. You know, like being a chess player, the word hope should not be in your vocabulary. Okay, now I'm thinking of taking on f2. It's not necessarily a It is a free pawn. Here's what I saw. If I take on f2, the rook takes on d4, but the rook no longer guards the queen. Then I'm able to play pawn to e5. So not only do I fork the rook and the knight, he's not able to move the knight because he loses the queen. So let's take on f2. We're now ahead by 3 pawns. We're just munching off all the pawns while his pieces are not doing anything. Not gonna lie though, a little selfish on my a8 rook there. It would be good if I was doing all of this with my rook on the c file, but let's keep taking material. If he's gonna give me another pawn, I'm gonna be taking another pawn. But he decided to give me a piece. Because he takes, the queen is now unprotected. Now, this is called a pin, guys. Hopefully you're able to see. Okay, what I said was if he moves the knight, he's going to lose the queen. But that's not necessarily the case because he could move the knight and not lose the queen. So basically, pawn to e5 is just a fork. It's an outright fork. The knight is pinned and he has to be careful where he puts the knight. But there is e2 and d3 where he could put the knight. And if he puts the knight to any of these squares, it does guard the queen, which is why he decided to just sack the rook. So let's just take here. But now my e5 pawn is left unprotected, and I'm assuming he's going to take the pawn. I mean, it's a free pawn, and it will also be attacking my rook. But once he does that, I have a little plan. Definitely have a little plan. He didn't do it though. That was bad, bro. Come on, man. You were playing too well, bro. That was bad. Anyways, hopefully you guys are able to spot this tactic, but my queen is on the same line as the king. The guy also blundered his knight, but my queen is on the same line as the king, which means h3 pawn is pinned. I have the knight lurking around. If you have your knights, ensure that you're looking out for these knight fork patterns. Now I'm able to hit him with knight to g4. Check the king, hit the queen. The king is forced to move. Once he moves the queen, we take the queen and we win the game. He moves the king. Let's grab the queen. And now it's GG's. Okay, he moves the king again. That's a free knight. At this point, he's just, my opponent resigns. But more Scandinavian against 800 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now in the 800 region. We're still going to be playing more Scandinavian defense. Immediately putting the question to the pawn. He takes the pawn. We take with the queen. Yes, we're developing our queen too early. He attacks the queen. Yes, we're moving the queen more than once. But after we break that principle, we're not going to be breaking any more principles. We're going to be getting the most solid setup, depending on how the opponent plays. Okay, now that he plays d3, he's immediately blocking out his bishop, which is bad. But let's continue with how we know how to develop the pieces. The knight goes to f6. I think he plays d3 because he wants to play bishop to d2. Not sure. Knight to f3 was played. If you're ever able to play moves like knight c6, bishop g4, and castle in the Scandinavian, then you have a very, very aggressive position. So the Scandinavian is one of those openings. Let's go knight c6. It's one of those openings where you could choose if you're going to be playing solid or you're going to be playing super aggressive. So once we're climbing up the rating ladder, you're going to be seeing me playing more moves like pawn c6, pawn e6, the more solid setup. But once the opponent is playing moves like pawn d3, blocking out his bishops, and these types of moves, we have to go with the aggressive setup. So after bishop e2, let's play pawn e5. It's a regular move. We're trying to put a pawn in the center of the board. Bishop to d2 was played. We have to be careful. Whenever you see the bishop on b2, then the bishop is pointing towards your queen on a5, and you should be looking out for some discovered attacking ideas. But for now, there's no dangerous discovered attacks that we need to be aware of. So let's just continue to develop our pieces normally. Let's just play bishop to g4 here. The goal is to castle the king on the queen side, by the way. And once we castle the king on the queen side, we attack their king that will be castled on the king side. h3 was played. Let's pull the bishop back. Let's not give up the bishop for a knight. Again, we are aware of this. The moment he puts the knight anywhere, we're going to be on the alert that our queen is under attack. He castles the king on the king side. We're going to be castling our king on the queen side so that we're able to attack his king on the king side. Knight to g5 is interesting. Basically, he's offering to trade bishops. If I take his bishop, his knight takes back, his bishop attacks my queen, and this knight on g5 will be targeting f7. So let's not fall for this. Let's pull the bishop back to g6. Let's keep the f7 pawn guarded. And we're just going to play pawn to h6 and chase his knight out of our half of the board. And by the way, in case you're asking, whenever the opponent moves the knight and attack our queen, we're likely going to be putting our queen on the b6 square, attacking the unprotected b2 pawn. And there will not be a lot more effective way to attack our queen. I mean, we could also play queen d5 if he moves this knight out the way as well. So knight e4 was played, the move I was expecting. Queen to b6, takes, queen b6, there is bishop e3. That is a free pawn though. Queen d5 okay, let's go with queen d5. Let's go with queen d5 because it centralizes the queen. Being a Scandinavian defense player, by the way, you have to be able to use your queen. You don't want to be one of those players who, once you have your queen out early, the opponent traps the queen. If you're getting your queen trapped in the Scandinavian, then you shouldn't be playing the Scandinavian. Now we're attacking his knight. Let's see where he puts it. Bishop to f3, counter-attacking the queen. That would definitely be an idea. If he pulls the knight back to f3, though, then his position is going to be a bit too cramped. Now, I want you guys to notice how, by taking here, doubling up my pawns, my rook gets the g file pointing towards his king. So he did find the bishop to f3 move. So I'm assuming he's going to be moving his knight to e4 on the next move. I'm just going to be moving my queen somewhere safe, like let's say d7. If he takes here, then I'm just going to take back. I'm fine. If the knight goes to e4, it's very important that we chase the knight out the center of the board because knights are very active once they're centralized. So let's play the move pawn to f5, hit the knight. If the knight goes back to g5, pawn to f6 could even trap the knight. So now the knight has to go to g3, which is not the most comfortable square for a knight. Knight f6 is also a move, but the knight could get trapped if it goes to f6. Knight f6 was played. I am forced to move my queen, so let's go queen to e6, hit the knight. Knight to h5, I'm going to play moves like knight d4 with the whole idea of trying to remove the pieces that are defending the knight so that way I'm able to win the knight. Otherwise, I'm thinking of moves like rook to g8 as well, just putting my rook on the same line as the king. I also need to develop my bishop, so I'm thinking of moves like bishop to c5, putting my bishop on the same line as the king. Okay, he took, which it's definitely a weird move. I was not expecting him to be giving up the bishop so easily. Let's just take. Now I have two bishops versus a bishop and a knight. His knight on f6 is also misplaced. He plays bishop to g5, guarding the knight. I'm thinking of just playing a move like bishop e7. Bishop e7, if he moves the knight, he loses the bishop. But if bishop e7, my bishop is going to be unprotected, so he could play knight e4, which is why I'm going to play bishop g7. But if bishop g7, there's knight h4. Okay, let's go with bishop to e7. If knight to e4, I may take the knight. He takes my rook. I go rook d7, hits the bishop. And once he moves the bishop, I take on d3, and that's going to be a free pawn. So I think either way, we're winning a pawn here. And he kind of has to find knight e4. I mean, he's playing well so far, but finding a move like knight e4 is definitely hard for an 800 rated player. If he plays knight takes h7, that would be interesting because my bishop is unprotected. So if I take his knight, he takes my bishop. So he plays f4. Yeah, he just left the knight hanging. We have two pieces attacking the knight. He only has his bishop guarding the knight. So let's just take the knight off the board, and we are now ahead by a piece. Once you're ahead by a piece, being a Scandinavian player, the goal is to trade pieces off the board. I'm not sure about trading now, though, seeing that we have opposite side castles. I'm able to play moves like rook to g8, putting my rook on the same line as his king. He plays queen to f3. That's a free pawn, but let's not get too greedy. Let's focus on our attack. So let's play rook to g8, putting the rook on the same line as the king. Rook to e1, I'm expecting. But if he plays rook to e1 and attack my queen, I'm going to be forced to move the queen anyway. So why not just grab a pawn? Which is why he plays pawn to c3 to protect the pawn. Okay, pawn to f4 wins the game. I mean, the plan is to take on d3. If he takes on f4, I trade the queen and I take on d3. And if he plays this pawn d3 move, I play queen to e3, get the queens off the board because we're ahead by a piece, and then we're going to be winning a simple endgame. Okay, he decides to block with his queen. He has to be very careful here because something may hit him because I am attacking the g2 square through my bishop. So what if I just don't take the queen just yet? and then play bishop to e4 instead. Now I have two pieces attacking g2. He only has his king guarding because the queen is pinned. Now I'm threatening to take on g2. And if he takes on e3, okay, he messed up big time. He plays rook to e1. This not only does this win a queen, this is actually a checkmate. Rook takes g2 check, the king has to go to h1 because pin piece does not protect. And once the king goes to h1, queen takes h3 will be a checkmate. So let's take on g2 with check. If he moves the king out the way, taking on h3, he did move the queen, which means that's just a checkmate. More Scandinavian against 900 rated players. Stick around. Her opponent is now 900. Scandinavian it is. He took the pawn. Let's take with the queen. We should know this exactly by now. Knight e3, queen goes to a5, and then we're going to be following up with knight f6, bishop f5. Knight f3, the move that we don't want to play is actually bishop g4. Let's play knight f6. Our bishop is going to f5. Pawn to d3. I've seen a lot of persons playing this pawn to d3 move. They're not seeing that it's blocking out their bishop. I guess it's because they want to immediately put the bishop on the same line as our queen. Ensure that you're aware of this, by the way. Let's go bishop to f5. When someone's put their bishop on the same line as your queen, you have to be ensured that you're aware of it. We're not going to immediately move our queen away because we know that there's no immediate knight move that could cause any discovered attack. But what we're going to do is we're going to play the move pawn to c6. The purpose of pawn to c6 is to allow our bishop, our queen, to come back to c7 once they move the knight. Now he plays pawn to g3. He's trying to fianchetto the bishop, but the bishop will not be active on this diagonal because it's just going to be pointing towards a pawn chain. So let's just keep developing our pieces normally. Let's go knight to d7, pawn to e6, bishop e7, castle the king. Some of you guys are going to forget that the bishop is on the same line as the queen. And as soon as they move the knight, you're probably going to capture on e4 and lose your queen. But it's a part of the learning process, I guess. Bishop g2, let's play e6 here. Very similar setup that we are going to be using for this entire speed run. So he castles the king. Let's put the bishop on e7. Eventually, the queen will go back to c7. I'm saying this a lot. Knight e4, we go back. Knight e2, we go back. Then he plays d4. So hopefully you guys are able to see why moving the pawn to d3 was such a mistake, because when he played d4, it just shows that he's wasting time. Okay, okay. Remember about this h6 move, guys. If you're able to play h6 so that way, if they play knight h4, you pull your bishop back to h7. That's a good move. So let's play h6 because we don't want him to play knight h4 and attack the bishop. And then we're forced to put the bishop on g6 and then he gets the bishop for the knight. So if any knight goes to h4, we pull the bishop back to h7. The rook is now on the same line as our king. Perfect time to get the king out the center of the board. All the minor pieces are developed. We managed to move the queen, which means our rooks are connected. We also know where to put the rooks. We're definitely going to be putting one of our rooks on the d file, but we're also going to be putting one of our rooks on the c file. And then eventually we're going to be playing this pawn to c5 move. That's the whole entire plan. So he plays a3, still not afraid of any knight moves. Also not seeing what that a3 move does. And remember to be aware of this rook on the same line as the bishop. So hopefully this opening just teach you to be aware of certain things. Because if I pull my queen back to c7 now, he could still go bishop f4, even though we can meet bishop f4 with bishop to d6. Let's play rook to d8. My rook is now on the same line as his queen. And then I'm going to play rook c8, queen c7, pawn c5. Such a simple setup. B4 was played. Very aggressive move. Let's pull the queen back to c7. Notice how he's moving his pawns. We could actually use this against him. For example, moves like pawn to a5, I'm thinking of, because then if he takes, I get all sorts of open file. But then if I play pawn to a5, he could also push to b5. This was the move I was talking about. Bishop to f4 can be met with bishop to d6. And if he takes, we're just going to be taking back and we're fine. So the whole point of the Scandinavian, especially the solid way how I'm playing it, is to get the setup that you're used to and then wait on your opponent to make these moves like b4 because his c4 score is already weak. Now he plays knight e5. It's definitely suspicious because this is pawn is pinned. If I takes and he takes with the pawn, wait, if I takes, bishop takes, takes, rook takes, takes. I'm not gaining anything from that. I'm not gaining anything from that. I like the idea of a5, but he's just gonna play b5. And then if I take, knight takes, and that's a fork. So let's be patient. Let's just be patient. Let's play the move rook to c8. We know the plan. We know the setup. He's already creating some weaknesses. So we're going to be working with that. For example, knight b6 to d5, knight b6 to c4 once this knight is not there. So he did play the b4 move that we were talking about. And if we take on b4, he has knight takes b4, forking our queen and our bishop. With that being said, I'm thinking of the move. Wait, let's think. Let's think. Let's think. Bishop takes. No, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, rook takes. And then after rook takes, I take on c2. That's definitely an idea. I take the pawn, the knight takes the pawn, I'm losing. My bishop takes the knight, the bishop takes back, my knight takes, the rook takes. Now I take on b5. If the knight takes on b5, I play queen takes c2, but then he's able to take here. Yo, b5 was a nice move. I'm not gonna lie. But we're gonna be going for okay. If I play c5, he's able to play d5, and if I take knight takes, and he's fine. So we're gonna be going with this idea: takes, pawn takes. I'm trying to figure out: do I take with the bishop or do I take with the knight first? Let's take with the bishop. Let's take with the bishop. If he takes with the pawn, at least I could say his bishop is no longer on this diagonal. If he takes with the bishop, however, my knight is going to be taking on e5. It's very, very tricky. Like, I'm thinking of sacrificing my queen on e5, taking back his queen, just so that way I can win the c pawn. But I don't think that's enough, especially since he has so much pressure on c6. If it's a clean pawn, then I will take it. It all depends on the compensation that he gets. Okay, so he took with the pawn. He's also threatening to take my knight. And if he takes my knight, my queen is going to be under attack. So I don't think I'm able to play any fancy knight moves to attack the queen. What if I move my knight to d5? I think that's what I'm going to do. Move the knight to d5, and if he takes with the knight, I take with the c pawn, and then his c pawn is going to be very weak. That's what I'm going to do. Let's play knight to d5. I don't think he should take on d5. He needs to do something, but not taking on d5. So he has the bishop here, but this bishop is blocked in by his own pawn, and this bishop is blocked in by my pawns. So I'm kind of fine here. If knight takes, pawn takes, I think I'm winning the c pawn. So the question is, what will he play? Because I'm also threatening to just take his knight. He took with the bishop. Yo, so he gave up the bishop here. Now I'm very active on the c file. I'm also attacking the knight twice. So he has to move the. Where is he going to put the knight? Because if he puts the knight on a5, he loses the knight. So he has to put the knight on a2 or b1, which is an ugly square for a knight. He was doing very well. And this is why to take is a mistake. If you're not 100% certain about the trade and how it's going to help your position, don't do it. You see how kind this guy is? He's very kind. He plays a5, protecting a pawn that I'm not attacking just to lose his knight. What he did not see, he just didn't see that once I take, his knight was under attack. Because the whole time, his knight was not under attack. Look how solid my pawn structure is. Tell you about the Scandinavian. The Scandinavian is very, very solid. Now that I'm thinking about it, the Scandinavian could even be more solid than the Caracan. Because the Caracan is solid, but you have to worry about exchange Caracan. You have to worry about alien gambit, HAL variation. The Scandinavian is just a Scandinavian. Okay, Rook C1 was played. I have one, two, three pieces attacking his pawn. He only has two pieces guarding the pawn. So once I take this pawn, that's just a free pawn. It's a dead pawn though. We're not going to be rushing it, especially since the rook is going to be on the same line as my queen. Let's use the time to get more pieces in the game. Knight to c5 attacks this unprotected pawn. I could also put my knight on the e4 square as well. Yo, I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm being so honest with you guys. Playing this series, playing the Scandinavian, I'm really considering playing the Scandinavian. So bishop to d2 was played. My queen is under attack. Let's just move away the queen. Queen has to move. Now I'm attacking this pawn twice. If he moves the pawn, then I'm going to be able to take the pawn. Otherwise, I'm threatening moves like knight e4 to c3 or knight a4 to c3. Everything is dying here. So he plays pawn to c3. He did not talk to his pawn because if he had spoke with his pawn, the pawn would have told him that it was covering the d3 square. Pawn no longer covers the d3 square. Knight to d3, and that's a fork. This is the drawback principle. Before you move one of your pieces, just ask the piece, where are you covering? That's all you need to do, you know. It's like the same energy that you guys take into telling yourself, this is why I'm going to move the piece. You have to put the same energy into telling yourself, what was the piece doing on in the first place? Because think about it. Wasn't there a reason why you put the piece there in the first place? So you don't just move the piece away without thinking about it. Very, very kind. This is a very kind player. He plays pawn to g4, attacking my bishop, but he's not counting. He's not seeing that I have two pieces covering the g4 square, and all he has is his queen. So now I'm just going to take on g4 and attack his queen. And keep in mind, taking with the queen would have also been perfectly playable because taking with the queen trades pieces off the board. So queen c2 was played. Now I'm thinking about checkmates. And by the way, I've told you this with pins. It's the same thing with forks. Whenever you fork two pieces, if they don't try to move away one of the pieces, we're not in any rush to take it. It's forked anyways. So let's just play the move bishop to h3 here. The threat is better than the execution. Now, if he even tries to move away one of his rooks, he's going to be getting checkmated. Honestly, it's also a bit tricky. Okay, he moved the rook to the right square. Because now if I check, he's gonna block with the rook. And he's attacking my bishop. So now is the time to take his rook. He could take my bishop in this position, but there's a trick there. There's a very trap there. If he takes the bishop, his king is exposed, the rook is unprotected. I'm gonna oh, he did took the bishop, my fellow viewers. Look on this. Exposed king, unprotected piece. Queen to g4, that's a fork. But then he thinks he's able to play rook to g3, blocking the check. But then I'm able to play knight to e4, hit the king and the rook, which is another fork. So let's hit him with the move queen to g4 check. If he moves the king, I'm obviously going to take with the rook. So I'm assuming he's going to be blocking with his rook. And once he blocks with the rook, knight back to e2, and that's a very nice fork. He's now forced to move the king. We take his rook, and then once he takes back my knight, because my rook is on the same line as this queen, I'm able to play the move pawn to d4, applying pressure to the pin pawn. And for the lower rated guys, yes, queen to f5 still wins the game. If you're winning, trade the pieces off the board. You'll still win the game that way. He moves the king. Let's just take here, attacking the bishop. Bishop is forced to move. The bishop is now pinned. What do we do when a piece is pinned? We apply pressure to the pin piece. And just like that, he's about to lose the bishop, and we're about to be ahead by two entire rooks. He moves the pawn. Let's just take the pawn. We're not in any rush. This pin is still there. Ah, okay, now he's just being funny. He's just giving away all his pieces, and then he resigns. But more Scandinavian against 1,000 level players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1,000. Plays e4. Let's just go d5, regular Scandinavian stuff. After they take, we take with the queen. Knight f3, I'm expecting. Then we play the move queen to a5. Now, this is just a regular setup. We know exactly what we're going to be doing. We also know where we're going to be putting the pieces as well. So he decides to play pawn to d4. Let's just continue with knight to f6, developing our pieces normally. Bishop to e3. Now we play bishop to f5. And the reason why we're playing the move bishop to f5 is so that way we're able to play e6, developing the dark squared bishop, and we don't block in our light squared bishop. Now, usually they put the bishop on d2 to put the bishop on the same diagonal as the queen. So that's definitely a bit inaccurate. I am looking on bishop b4, applying some pressure to this knight. There's also knight e4, applying some pressure to the knight. But I think either way, he's just going to play bishop to d2. And the position seems pretty safe. Now, whenever they play bishop to d3, I like to just ignore it because if we take on d3, the queen is going to take back, and that's helping him. If he takes on f5, we take with the queen, and that's helping us. So with that being said, let's just continue with our development, knight to d7. And again, the move order is not the most important thing. The setup is. So if you had played c6 or bishop to e7 before you play knight d7, that would be fine. Let's just take back on f5 with the queen here. The queen is also very active on f5. There's no ways in which he could attack our queen and then our queen is getting trapped or anything like that. Let's continue with pawn to c6. This e6 followed by c6 idea is to ensure that we have a very solid position and it just prevents the opponent from ever thinking about playing pawn to d5. The rook goes to e1. The rook is on the same line as our king. So let's just play bishop to e7 with the idea of just running our king out the center of the board. And just keep in mind, once the king is castled, the plan is to start getting the major pieces in the game. Our queen is already very active, so we're going to be getting our rooks in the game. H3 was played. Maybe he's trying to play g4. Maybe he's trying to prevent something from going to g4. I think that's what he's trying to do. But let's just get our king out the center of the board. Very regular setup. And then from here, we're going to be playing moves like rook to d1, putting our rook on the same line as the queen. We could play rook to c8, followed by c file, just to open both the d and the c file for both of our rooks. Knight back to e2 is an interesting move. It's a maneuver, so we have to see where the knight is headed. Because he plays knight e2, it looks as if he's trying to put the knight on g3 to attack the queen, which I do not have a lot of issues with. I'm just going to put the queen back on a5, and we know that the original square for the queen is c7. With that being said, let's finish with our development. Let's put our rook on the same line as the opponent's queen, so that way we could think about some c5 or some e5, opening the d file and getting some discovered attack on his queen. I think he's definitely going to play this knight g3 move though, but I'm just going to play queen a5. Once the queen goes back to c7, the position is just very solid. So he did play knight g3. Let's play queen a5. So once you're playing the Scandinavian, you're going to be using your queen a lot. So for one, ensure that you don't get your queen trapped. Once you know where the different thematic squares where you could get your queen, then you should be fine. So he decides to play pawn to c3. Because my rook is on the same line as his queen, I'm thinking of both e4 and c5 here. Now, my bishop is also unprotected. I want you guys to keep in mind, whenever you have this unprotected bishop and the rook is on the same line as the bishop, just ensure that there's no knight f5 tactic or anything that will prevent you from taking anything on d5 because of that bishop. To continue with getting the rest of my pieces active, I want you guys to notice every piece is active except my a rook. So I'm going to play the move pawn to c5. The whole idea of playing pawn to c5 is to now open the c file. And then once the c file is open, it means I'm going to have a rook. I'm going to have an open file for my rook on d8, and I'm going to have an open file for my rook on c8. Queen to b3 is an interesting move. He's immediately targeting my unprotected pawn on b7. That could very well be qualified as a poisoned pawn though, because the moment he takes on b7 and I play rook to b8, I should be winning back the b2 pawn. Another idea that you guys need to keep in mind. With that being said, let's just take on d4. Now both the d and the C file is open. And one idea that I have in mind, especially if he takes with the knight, I'm able to play knight C5, which would hit the queen and guard my pawn at the same time. Otherwise, I'm thinking if I really want to trade the pawn with rook b8, or do I just guard the pawn? So he took with the bishop. Knight c5 hits the queen. If he takes on c5, then I just take back on c5. And as we discussed, if the queen ever decides to take on b7, we go rook b1, hit the queen, take back the pawn on b2, and we have a very, very solid position. So let's continue with our idea. Knight c5, attacking the queen. Whenever you have two pieces adjacent to each other like this, always ensure that you're aware of any possible forks that could happen. But he decided to give up his bishop. I don't think that was a good move. You don't want to just give up your bishop that is in the center of the board and controlling so many squares for a knight. But let's just take back with the queen. Taking on b7, I go rook b8, take on b2. Oh, he did take on b7. This is also an idea that you guys are going to be seeing in a lot of different openings and a lot of different positions where someone takes the b7 pawn, you play the move rook to b8, and now you attack their queen. Where does the queen go? I think a6 is the only square for the queen. This is called a skewer, by the way, where the stronger piece or the more valuable piece is forced to move out the way. And once the more valuable piece moves out the way, we're able to take the less valuable piece. So once he moves the queen, we take on b2. We now separate his pawn structure. But not only are we threatening this checkmating idea on f2, we're also threatening a free pawn on c3. So definitely like my position here. I'm expecting rook to e2 or rook to f1. One thing I'm looking on though is the moment I take on c3, my a7 pawn is unprotected. So unless I take on c3, attacking his unprotected rook on a1 or something, then I'm not going to be taking on c3. Okay, he plays pawn to c4. He decided to save his c pawn and not his f pawn. And that basically means we have a checkmate in two moves here. Queen takes f2 check. The king is then forced to move to g1, and then queen takes g2 is going to be a checkmate. So let's take on f2 with check. He has to move the king to h1, and that's just a checkmate. More Scandinavian at the 1100 level. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1100. d5 is the Scandinavian. Okay, let's just take the pawn here. Knight c3 is the main move. Do not be checking the king if they play knight c3. Just put your queen on a5, knowing that there's no more way to attack the queen. You broke the opening principle by moving a queen out early. So let's start following principles now. d4 is the main move. Let's go knight to f6, just developing our pieces, following the regular structure that we looked on. Then after knight f3, no need to play bishop g4 because we move the queen more than once in the opening stage of the game. So we do not want to move the bishop so many times. So let's just go bishop to f5, developing our pieces normally, following the structure that we're used to. Pawn goes to c6, pawn goes to e6, bishop to d2, thematic idea. You see a bishop on d2, you keep in mind that it is on the same line as your queen. Whenever I see these bishop d2 move, I like to immediately play pawn c6 because I want to be prepared for any knight move. There's no knight move that is going to be too dangerous for us here. But any knight move he plays, we're going to be pulling our queen back to c7. Obviously, if he puts the knight here, we have to go back to d8, and then he's going to be forced to move the knight again anyway. So there's nothing here that we're afraid of. Bishop to d3 is bad, by the way, and this is the spirit that we're going to be playing the Scandinavian in, where we're going to be taking on d3, doubling up the opponent's pawn, and then our plan for the remainder of the game will be to target those weak pawns. Now, he took on d3. Let's play the move knight to d7. Let's finish our development. Eventually, we're going to pull our queen back to c7 because you should feel a level of discomfort with the bishop on the same diagonal as your queen. So, for example, he castles the king. Let's pull the queen back to c7. And something I want you guys to realize about the Scandi is oftentimes white castles their king before we're able to castle our king. But the thing is, it's just such a solid position where we're just going to play e6, bishop e7, or bishop to d6. And white is not able to do any immediate pawn breaks to burst open the center of the board. So, for example, rook e1, his rook is on the same line as our king, but we're just going to play e6. And then we're going to be following up with bishop to d6 or e7. We're going to be castling our king. And once we're completed with our development, all our focus will be going towards attacking these doubled isolated pawns. And if you're not sure what an isolated pawn is, it's basically a pawn that has no pawns beside it. A4, not sure why a move like A4 was played. I guess he's trying to push the pawns down, but I don't see what that does. Let's continue with our development. Bishop goes to E7, and then we're going to be castling our king. I didn't want to put the bishop on d6 because knight to e4 hits the bishop, and we don't want to take the knight and undouble his pawns. There's nothing that we're going to do to undouble this guy's pawns unless he's giving us a free pawn, because him having the double pawns is an advantage for us. So knight e4, remember, to take is still a mistake. If we take on e4, it improves the opponent's position. So we're not going to be doing that. So let's just get our king out the center of the board. We managed to connect to our rooks. And remember what I keep on saying. If you want to know if you've done what you needed to do in the opening stage of the game, then this is what your back rank needs to look like. Your king and your two rooks should be the only pieces on the back rank. But the rooks are pointing towards their own pawns. And we spoke about this. If your rooks are pointing towards their own pawns, then you need to give the rook some work to do. Okay, so he took on f6, which that's not needed. I think that's bad because he moves the knight to e4 just to take on f6. How do I take back? I could take with the bishop. Yeah, let's take with the bishop so that way we're immediately targeting his d4 pawn. My knight is not doing much on d7. I'm thinking of moves like knight b6 to d5, knight b6 to d5, or knight f6 to d5 is very, very thematic whenever you're playing the Scandinavian. So bishop to b4 was played, fair enough. He's attacking my rook. In my defense, I could just say he's helping me to put the rook on the open file. He's helping me to put the rook on the same line where his isolated pawn is. So once I move my knight out the way, I'm going to be attacking his pawn twice, and then I'm going to be ahead by a pawn. And if he allows me to win this pawn, then his d3 pawn is going to be falling with it as well. So he pulls the bishop back to c3. Fair enough. He's trying to ensure that he guards the pawn to the best of his ability. Let's play knight to b6. This is a bad bishop, by the way. Even though it's doing a good defensive role, it is a bad bishop. You never want to have your bishops pointing towards its own pawns. Your bishops should be on long diagonals, like this bishop attacking this pawn on d4. I'm attacking the pawn twice. He's guarding the pawn twice for now, so we are not winning the pawn, but I'm planning on doubling up my rooks on the d file and think about some c5 break and then take on d3. But let's see, maybe he's going to be blundering by then. A5 was played. He's attacking my knight. He's forcing the knight to move. But as we said, the d5 square is usually a thematic square for the knight. The knight is very well placed in the center. It's attacking this bishop that we don't really have a lot of intentions to take unless it's a move like c5 and then we take and then we fork. F4 is a very nice square for a knight because if we put the knight on f4, it attacks a lot of squares on his half of the board. And then if he plays g3, he is weakening the squares around his king. So he pulls the bishop back. I think he wants to take my knight if I put it on f4, but that would be good for me. So let's put the knight on f4. If he wants to trade, and one thing I want you guys to keep in mind, I'm attacking this pawn by the way. Whenever the opponent has pawn weaknesses like isolated pawns, backward pawns, exchanging the minor pieces will benefit us. Let's take on f4 because the minor pieces are the pieces that complicates the game. If you're able to go into an endgame where it's like a queen and a rook versus a queen and a rook, and you're attacking an isolated pawn, it's going to be way easier for us to win the pawn. Now, I'm attacking this pawn 3 times. He's only guarding it once. So he has to find some very creative way to not immediately lose the pawn. Knight e5 was not one of them because now there's nothing guarding the pawn. Now, I'm just going to take the free pawn. Tempted to take with the rook, but I don't see what that does. If I take with the queen, I'm attacking this pawn and I have 2 pieces attacking the knight. So let's take with the queen. Just like that, we're ahead by a pawn. We're also attacking this knight, which is one of the main defenders of his d3 pawn. So moving his knight out the way could result in him losing another pawn, which he did. And once he moves the knight out the way, now we take on d3 and we're ahead by 2 pawns. Now, guys, just have a look on my pawn structure. I want you guys to notice how I'm not making a bunch of unnecessary pawn moves. And just to how the Scandinavian pawn structure is set, it's set in such a way where it does not force you to play too many pawn breaks to create a plan. My opponent did not trade the queens, because he's down in material, very, very principled. I'm thinking of taking a free pawn, but he's able to play rook to b1. And then if I play bishop c3, hits the rook, he plays rook to d1. And I do not want to lose my b7 pawn. Because one thing I talk about a lot is the winning side don't want to be trading the pawns. The winning side wants to actually win the pawns. So I'm actually going to be putting my queen on a6. It looks like a weird square for the queen. Usually you want to be centralizing your queen, but my bishop is still attacking his b2 pawn. If he plays rook to b1 thinking he's going to be winning my b7 pawn, my queen is guarding it and his a5 pawn is now my target. So he plays pawn to a3. Rook to d5 was my plan, but because he's giving me another free pawn, let's just take all his pawns. And if he goes here, I'm going to play bishop c3, hits the rook and this pawn. So he plays rook to d1, doesn't change the situation. His a5 pawn is weak. Now we go bishop c3, hit the rook, apply more pressure to his a5 pawn. Again, I would love for you guys to use this video to learn how to play strategic chess, positional chess. Notice how Once the opponent's rook takes my rook, I take back with the rook. Now I have an open file. Rook d1 I was expecting, but I'm still gonna trade. Once I trade and he takes with the queen, I'm able to take with the queen. And it looks weird. Maybe he thinks there's a checkmate, but there's actually no checkmate. Oh, he's probably wondering, why am I not hearing the sound? Because that's a free queen, sir. Well, he resigns. More Scandinavian against 1200 rated players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1200 Scandinavian. It is. And once they take the pawn, we play queen takes pawn. We know the drill. He attacks the queen goes to a5, and then regular development using our simple, solid setup. He attacks the queen goes to a5. Not no queen e4, e5 check. I've seen a lot of person checking. Don't be checking. And then after knight f3, you don't necessarily want to play bishop g4 because we don't want to be losing our bishop here in the Scandinavian because you already moved the queen more than once. So let's try to develop our pieces as quickly as possible and get to a regular, solid setup. Now, after d4, we develop the bishop to f5, not playing e6 too early because it's going to be blocking out our bishop. And then after that, we're going to be able to play moves like e6, c6, bishop e7, knight d7. He puts his bishop on e3 instead of putting the bishop on d2, which means we're not necessarily in any rush to move the queen. Let's play pawn to e6. Pawn e6, there's no d5. If bishop to d3, we don't have to do anything. He then played bishop to e2. Now we're going to play the move bishop to e7 with the whole idea of getting our king out the center of the board. Now he castled this king, and there's one thing that I want you guys to be aware of. Knight h4. If we allow them to play knight h4 and we pull the bishop back to g3, then he's going to have the bishop here and it could give him an advantage. However, knight h4, bishop g6, takes could benefit us if it opens the h file for the rook. So let's still play h6 though, so that if the knight goes to h4, we're able to pull the bishop back to h7. It is a thematic idea. Another idea that you guys want to keep in mind is whenever the knight goes to h4, if a bishop is not on e2, you could play bishop g4. So now that he pull his bishop back to d2, that's when we're going to play pawn c6. Again, a bishop on d2, please be aware. Don't be losing your queen and then crying to me in the comments. Knight to e4 is like the most dangerous thing he could do. Now he's attacking my queen. Once you don't fall for this trick, just pull your queen back to c7. If he takes my knight, my bishop takes. There's nothing there. Otherwise, I'm going to play knight to d7 and castle my king. So he took. Let's take with the bishop. We are applying some pressure to his d4 pawn. I'm assuming he's going to play pawn c3 to ensure that he keeps the pawn guarded. And then we're going to play the move knight to d7. We're going to castle the king, definitely on the king side. So he did play c3. Let's go knight to d7 first. And the Scandinavian is one of those openings where it is safe to castle the king, obviously, don't get me wrong. But a lot of times, white is going to castle their king before you, and you could even finish your setup before you castle the king because it's very hard for them to get a break. The rook is on the same line as my king, though, so let's get the king out the center of the board. We're definitely used to this pawn structure by now. We should know how to play with this pawn structure. The plan from here is to play moves like doubling up the rooks on the d file and trying to play e5, trying to play c5. Your entire plan should be surrounding where do I put the rooks? Where do I do my pawn break? So he plays a4. That looks like a move where someone play where they're not entirely sure what to do. Let's play rook to d8 here, putting the rook on the same line as the queen. I'm now thinking of moves like pawn c5, breaking in the center of the board, and then if he takes, my knight takes, and I'm opening the d file. So then he plays h3. He's playing a lot of pawn moves. I'm assuming he's not sure what to do in this position. Let's continue with our plan. Pawn to c5. Now we're going for the pawn breaks. For all of the persons who do not know how to plan in chess, just look on your pawns. Planning has a lot to do with the pawns. He now played the move rook to c8. He's basically saying, if you take my pawn, I take your pawn, I attack your queen. It's not something that I'm afraid of, by the way, because after takes, he will have an isolated d pawn, and then my whole entire plan will be to attack the isolated d pawn. What I'm not going to do is rush it, though. I'm thinking of playing something like queen to b6 first. Because after takes, my queen will be under attack anyways. So if I play a move like, let's say, queen to b6, at least I'm taking my queen off the same line as the rook, and I'm attacking this unprotected pawn. If he takes on c5, I could even take on b2, and then he has the ugliest double pawns. Otherwise, I take on d4 because now I'm attacking his d4 pawn 3 times. I think black has a slight advantage here. So he took. I could take, my rook is on the same line as the queen. That is nice. But I could also take on b2 here. Taking on b2 means this pawn will still be dead. And the moment I move my knight, I will be pressuring his d2 pawn. And taking on b2 means he's not able to attack my queen. If he's not able to attack my queen, I should be safe. So let's take on b2. So if I'm able to take this pawn, then take this pawn on c5, not only am I going to be ahead by a pawn, but his a4 pawn is going to be weak. His c3 pawn is going to be weak. I think you guys should use this video on the Scandinavian, especially if you're not a Scandinavian player and you're just trying to improve your thinking system to understand strategic chess and understand how to identify weaknesses in the opponent's position, trying to create weaknesses in the opponent's position, because the Scandinavian has a lot of that, especially since you're going to have the most solid structure to play with. So then he plays pawn to c4. I don't know why. There's no bishop going to c3. My bishop covers the square. Now he's not even able to play knight to d4. This bishop, my two bishops are doing very good role covering these squares. Now I'm going to just take the pawn on c5. I'm ahead by a pawn, but not only that, my rook is on the same line as his queen. His bishop is pinned. My queen is applying pressure to the pinned bishop. His knight is guarding the bishop. So I'm thinking about ways to apply more pressure to this bishop. For example, knight b3, hit the rook, hit the bishop. Bishop to e4, which is what he's forcing me to do. Because now he plays g4. My goal is to win this bishop for free. He's attacking my bishop. Where am I going to put the bishop? I'm going to put the bishop on e4 because the knight is the main defender of his d2 bishop. So now if he moves the knight, it's just drawback, and we're winning the bishop, and we're also going to be trapping his queen. Otherwise, we're going to be taking the knight, main defender of the bishop, then grab the bishop, winning the game. Also, guys, don't be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on like this. Like, this is just a strategic mistake. So he did play king to g2, and this is just nice. First of all, because he plays king to g2, we're actually not going to be giving up our bishop here. I mean, we could take the knight and then take on d2, but I want you guys to notice something. If I take the knight, well, I think in both cases he's going to be losing his queen, but that's just a free bishop, basically. The knight is pinned, and pinned pieces does not protect. But the fact that the knight is pinned is not the only thing. The queen is trapped. There's nowhere for his queen to go. So I'm just going to be taking the queen on the next move, and that's just totally winning. He plays rook to b1, a move I was expecting. If I take the rook, his knight is able to take my rook. But here's what I saw. I'm just going to take his queen. Because if I take his queen and then he takes my queen, I'm able to take this rook, which the knight is not guarding because pin pieces does not protect. So once I take the queen and he takes my queen and I take his rook, my bishop will also be attacking his rook. And his rook is the main defender of this bishop. So he did take. Let's take on e1. The knight is pinned. I'm attacking the rook. The rook is the only defender of the bishop. So once he moves the rook, he has to ensure that he keeps the bishop guarded. I'm ahead by 9 points, by the way. Rook to d2 makes a lot of sense. Let's just play rook to d8 here. If you're ahead by 9 points, you should be fine with trading pieces off the board. In the spirit of the Scandinavian, you get the solid setup. You just need to start squeezing the position now. The question is, where is he going to put the bishop? Well, he gave me the bishop, so let's just take the bishop. Now he only has the knight on the board. Once we take his knight, then it should be GG's from here. So he plays h4. Before we take the knight, let's just give a check. Let's bring more pieces in the game. Let's force the king to move. If he puts the king here, now the knight is pinned. Now we're trying to take the knight for free instead of just trading the knight. So let's play the move knight to d3. The goal is to apply pressure to his pinned knight, and he will be getting checkmated. King f1 was played. I am also attacking the f2 pawn twice. So let's just take on f2 with check. The king has to go to g1. Now we take the free knight, and this should be checkmate in one move, actually. After pawn g5, the checkmate in one, is bishop h2. More Scandinavian against 1300 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1300. Let's go more Scandinavian. Okay, pawn takes, let's take with the queen. We've seen this a lot of time. If knight c3, we move the queen. Knight f3 was played. That's definitely a new move. He's not necessarily attacking the queen early. When they do this, just don't panic. Just do not move the queen until the queen is attacked. So let's play our regular knight f6. Knight c3 was played. Now we play queen to a5. And then after d4, we put the bishop on f5. That's what we've been learning. And then when they play bishop to d3, we do not take. Because if we take, we're helping their queen. So we play the move pawn to e6, allowing them to take. And then once they take, you notice how he's moving the same piece more than once in the opening? Now we take back, and our queen is actually perfectly placed on f5. There's no way for him to say, okay, I'm going to trap your queen or anything like that. So he castles the king. I need to get my king out the center as well. But I'm going to start by playing the move knight to d7, just developing my pieces. If I had played bishop to e7 or pawn to c6, that would have also worked. Knight to e5 looks like a move that he's trying to play though. So I'm going to try to prevent knight d5 with a little prophylactic move. Knight e5 is not a bad move, by the way. So if I go rook d8, knight e5, takes, rook takes, takes pawn takes knight takes. I mean, I don't really gain anything from that though. That's the thing. I really don't gain anything. With that being said, let's just play pawn c6 and continue with our regular natural development. If he decides to play knight e5, I'm going to play bishop to d6, and then I'm going to be castling my king on the next move. Pawn to h3. Okay, I'm sure he's not trying to play pawn to g4 because that would be pushing pawns on the side that the king is on, which is a mistake. Let's play the move bishop to d6, not bishop e7, because we're trying to have some control over this e5 square. I'm going to be castling my king next, and you guys know the drill. Once the king is castled and all the pieces are out, it's time to start getting the rooks in the game with moves like rook to d8, rook to c8, pawn c5. That's basically the whole plan of the Scandi. Queen to e2. He's really trying to put something on the e5 square. Let's just get our king out the center of the board, though. We're fine. Everything is solid. If the knight comes to e5, I may just ignore everything and play rook to d8. But then pawn to g4 may trap my queen. I have to be very careful. If the knight comes to e5, I'm thinking of taking on e5, takes back on e5, then I play knight to d5 because I have to be very careful. Like the queen actually belongs on c7. So the queen is safer on c7 than on f5. But once the queen is on f5, we just have to ensure that we're able to see all the possibilities in which he could attack our queen. So he chose to play knight e4, which is one of the ways to play. He's attacking my bishop, and if I takes, he plays queen takes, and he's trading some pieces off the board. Let's take the knight though. Only thing is, once he takes, I'm actually not going to take the queen. I'm going to play the move queen to a5, putting some pressure on his rook. I'm not afraid of knight g5 threatening mate because I have knight to f6. And then I'm going to be able to put my queen on c7 where it's very safe. So pawn c3, no need to play queen to c7 just yet. I'm thinking of knight to f6, but he has queen to h4. So it is definitely time for us to start thinking about our rooks. I'm going to start by playing the move rook to d8, putting my rook on this open file. So his queen is still compromised because I'm able to play knight f6, but after knight f6, he's gonna play queen to h4. I'm not really seeing what I get from that. So I want to spend the time to get more pieces in the game. So knight g5 was played. Now he's starting h7. We're gonna protect the h7 square and attack his queen at the same time. And then once he moves the queen out the way, we should be able to play moves like pawn to h6, which would be chasing his knight away. So the queen went back to c2. I think he wants to play knight e4. This is a very solid player who is playing with the white pieces. What I'm going to play once I see this queen on c2, let's play rook to c8. Let's put our rook on the same line as the queen. So that way we could think about some moves like pawn to c5, followed by pawn takes on d4, and then his c pawn could be pinned. Okay, bishop to d2. Maybe he wants to play c4 to attack my queen. I should be able to meet c4 with queen c7 though. So let's play pawn to c5 here. If pawn c4 attacks my queen, we're going to be playing queen to c7. And yes, I'm aware that the knight is on my half of the board. Okay. Now it's getting very interesting. He sacrificed his knight on e6. This move does not work. He just doesn't have enough pieces in the attack. Let's just take the knight. After rook takes, now I take on d4. Where is the attack? Okay, let's take on d4. This is what we spoke about. Because my rook is on the same line as the queen, his c pawn is now pinned. I mean, maybe he could push it just to attack my queen, but then I'm just going to be moving the queen. We're ahead by an entire piece here, by the way. And he sacrificed his knight to get some attack on my king, some attack that I'm not seeing. One forcing move that I see he has is queen to b3, putting the queen on the same line as my king. But then I'm going to play queen to d5, threaten the rook, threaten to trade the queens, and I'm just going to be winning with the extra piece. Yeah, he definitely messed up there. Pawn to a3. Maybe he wants to play d4. Okay, there's two moves to create a threat here. One way to create a threat is queen b6, putting my queen on the same rank as his rook with the threat of bishop h7. And there's also pawn to d3, which just outright attacks the queen. And then if the queen takes, bishop h2 still wins. So let's go with this pawn to d3 move. If he puts the queen on b3, as we spoke of, we're going to play queen to d5, and that wins the game. If he plays queen to b3, we were expecting this. Let's play queen to d5. Basically, what we're doing is we're forcing the queens off the board. If you're ahead in material and the opponent has some form of attack on your king, the first piece that you should try to trade off the board is the queens. So the queen took. Let's take back. And this is just going to be a winning endgame. So I want you guys to notice how solid the Scandinavian could be. So rook to d1 was played, as we said. We also have a pass pawn, so we're trying to push the pass pawn. The bishop is blockading the pass pawn, so I'm going to be hitting him with bishop to f4. For one, I'm trading the pieces off the board, and two, if his bishop takes and I take back, I hit the rook, and then I'm also preparing to push my pass pawn. And we know the drill in the endgame. Pass pawns must be pushed. Okay, so he took. Let's take, hit the rook. He has to move the rook. And then I'm going to push rook here. Okay, how do I turn my pawn into a queen? So rook here was played, attacking my knight. I'm also thinking of checking him here. Okay, if I push, he has rook over. And if I go here, he takes the pawn. Okay, let's not rush the end game. Let's play knight g6. So that way, if I have to double protect my pawn, I'll double protect my pawn. But I want to turn my pawn into a queen. So he puts the rook here. If I push, he goes back. So let's play rook to c6. So that way, if I have to play rook to d6, I protect my pawn because I'm trying to turn my pawn into a queen. And by the way, I could have just sacrificed my pawn just to get a pair of rooks off the board. That would have also been winning. He plays f3. He's trying to get his king in the game. Let's push the pass pawn now. So that way, if he plays rook back, I'm able to play rook to d6. And if I have to get both of the rooks off the board in order to lose my pawn, then that's definitely going to be worth the trade. But then he plays rook to d5. There's an immediate win in this position. Hopefully, you're able to spot it. But the first thing I'm going to do is take the rook. Once I take the rook and he takes back, because the rook and the king is on the same rank, I'm going to play the move rook to c1. And his rook is going to be pinned, so he's going to be forced to take my rook. And then I'm going to take back, trade the queens off the board, and win the game. So let's take on d4 here. He took. Let's play rook to c1, and now the game is over. If he takes, I take back. That's a queen. He's not able to take here, which is why my opponent resigns. More Scandinavian against 1400 players. Stick around. Our opponent is in the 1400 region. E4 was played, we're still playing the Scandinavian. It could be an aggressive Scandinavian or it could be a solid Scandinavian. He took the pawn. Let's stick with the queen. Knight c3, we're used to this by now. The queen goes to a5, and we should know what the normal setup is. It's very important that you know the setup. And what I mean by knowing the setup is knowing exactly where the pieces belong. So d4, we definitely play knight f6. We know that a knight belongs on f6. One thing that I've seen persons done that we should not do is to play a move like pawn to e6 without developing our light squared bishop. Bishop to d2 was played. Remember what we spoke about? Well, there's actually a lot of things happening here because one thing I trained on chess reps was if the bishop blocks the queen and the pawn is unprotected, queen to b6 is in fact a fork. But I do not want to be the greedy type. So let's play pawn to c6. Please be aware that the guy's bishop is on the same line as your queen. If you're not aware of this and he moves his knight to a random square and then you take the knight, you're going to lose the queen. So the purpose of c6 is the moment it's time for us to move our queen, we're going to be pulling our queen back to c7. So knight f3 was played. Let's continue with the plan. Let's go bishop to f5. Again, we know the setup. Once you know the setup, the order in which you make the move is not the most important. You just need to use a chess understanding. If I play e6 before bishop f5, I'm going to block my bishop in. So let's play bishop f5. Now, when it comes to do I play e6 or do I play knight to d7, it doesn't really matter a lot. Now, you could go e6 if your goal is to quickly get the king out the center of the board, though. Bishop to c4 was played. Please be aware of your f7 pawn, but that's the purpose of pawn to e6, making the bishop point towards this pawn chain. If you have the opponent's pieces pointing towards pawn chains, then the bishop is actually not as active as it thinks. The opponent decides to castle the king, and now I'm thinking of just moving my knight, actually. Knight e4, queen here takes. But let's just pull the queen back. Let's pull the queen back so that way we're not afraid of any discovered attack anymore. And one other reason why we want to pull our queen back to c7 is to control the f4 square. The opponent's bishop is not able to get to f4. And in a lot of positions, you should be able to play moves like knight d5 to f4. The rook is on the same line as my king. Let's not take this lightly. Let's put the bishop in the way so that way we could quickly get the king out the center of the board. And one annoying move I want you guys to keep in mind is this knight h4 move. Whenever they play knight h4, you do not have to pull your bishop back to g6 and allow the knight to take the bishop. If they do play knight h4, consider playing the move bishop to g4 and attack their queen. So bishop to g5 was played. Okay, if I play h6, I'm assuming he's just going to be giving up a bishop for a knight, which is not the best. But let's get the king out the center of the board first. Remember, we're playing the Scandinavian defense. It all depends on how white plays it. Like, white could play the line in such a way where it allows us to castle on the queen side and we play very, very aggressive. Or if white plays the line like how he's playing it now, we just need to ensure that we play solid. And if you're one of those persons who, you usually don't do well in the opening, but once you get a position where you're not loose coming out of the opening, then you're fine on your own. This is a nice opening to play because you know the setup, you know where the pieces belong, you know the little thematic knight d7 to b6 to d5 maneuvers, you know where to put the rook, so you should be fine. This was the exact move that I was talking about. So the regular person may just pull the bishop back to g6, the knight takes, we take, it's fine, but we don't want to easily give the opponent the bishop here. Okay, bishop g4 is what I was considering. Let me briefly look on knight g4. Knight g4 hits the unprotected bishop and my queen targets h2. If knight g4, bishop e7, I take on h2 check, king goes to f1, and I'm just down by a piece. He got away. Let's go bishop to g4. Let's continue with our idea. And if he plays f3 and I pull my bishop back, then his knight is stuck on the edge of the board. And if he plays g4, I pull the bishop back. Yes, he gets the bishop here, but his king is going to be weak. We know about this idea. So f3, let's pull the bishop back to h5. The knight is now trapped on the edge of the board, by the way. So I am expecting him to play g4. He decides to pull his bishop back to d3 because the bishop wasn't really doing anything here. G4 bishop back, I'm just going to take. So definitely not scared of anything there. My bishop here is not yet developed. So let's just finish our development here. And one thing I want you guys to keep in mind, and please keep this in mind, your bishop on e7 is an unprotected piece. Whenever a rook is on e8, keep that in mind. For example, knight f5. Knight f5 is a move, because if he plays knight f5 and I take, he takes. But if he does play knight f5, I'm just not going to take. I'm going to probably play something like bishop to b4 and then force him to move the knight again. But it's something that I want you guys to be aware of. He did play knight to f5, but, I was prepared for this. If we take, the rook is going to take our bishop. So let's just get the bishop out of the way because the knight is also attacking the bishop. Let's get the bishop out of the way first. Let's put it on a good square like b4. No, he has to move the knight. No, I'm threatening to take the knight. I think he's going to pull his knight back to e3 or g3 to attack my bishop. In a lot of cases, I would love to pull my bishop back to d6 if once he moves the knight, so that way I'm able to target this h2 pawns. Because remember, when it comes to attacking the opponent's king, the focal point is what we want to target. He pulls the knight back. It is attacking my bishop. So let's just pull the bishop back to g6. And if he takes, we're obviously going to be taking with the H pawn. Remember, every pawn move that you play leaves some weaknesses behind. So if he takes with the bishop and we take with the F pawn, we are going to be losing our E6 pawn. I want you guys to notice that the position is very, very solid. And we're waiting for the opponents to play moves like this. Once they play moves like this is the thing. A lot of person is like, my 1400 opponents doesn't play like this. They do. You just have to find it. Like, what changed in the position when the bishop goes back to d2? Maybe he's like, okay, once he takes, I want to be able to take with the bishop, but the queen no longer guards this bishop. No, I'm going to take the bishop. Remember what we said about trades and taking. To take is still a mistake, and we still only trade when it improves our position. But taking here definitely improves our position. Now, my plan from here is to start targeting these very weak pawns on the e file. Queen b6 is the first move that jumps out. I'm assuming he's just going to play bishop to e3 though. Let's keep it principled though. Let's keep it principled. We moved every single piece except our rooks. Let's not starve the rooks. Let's get the rooks in the game. Let's play rook to d8. I could have also played rook a to d8, by the way. Knight e4 is I could see why he'd play a move like knight e4. We're definitely not going to take the knight. Remember, to take is a mistake. This trade would help his position. So we're not going to be going with that trade. What I want to do is move my knight out the way so that way I'm able to target this weak pawn. That's not my plan. Like, remember we said planning has to do with the pawn structure. My plan is to now target this pawn. So queen b6, bishop e3, knight d5, I don't like. I want to play knight b6 so that way my rook attacks the pawn. But if I play knight b6, the knight is no longer guarding this knight. So first I'm going to pull my bishop back to e7. And we know about this e7 square and this rook. So you just have to calculate to ensure that it is safe. Queen c1 was played, which means he's just covering the f4 square. He wants to put his bishop on f4, but we're going to be targeting his d4 pawn still. Once the bishop goes to f4, I should be able to find safe squares for my queen. So let's continue with our plan of knight b6. And if bishop f4, I just move the queen. So he decided to play bishop to e3 instead. Now I'm going to hit him with knight to d5. And knight d5 is a very interesting move because our whole idea is to fix the weakness. What I mean by fixing the weakness is whenever you're trying to target a weakness, it's important that you prevent it from moving first. Now, it's tricky what piece to take with here. If I take like this, the rook is no longer open. So I'm definitely going to be taking with the rook. Let's just take with the rook here. And taking with the rook also allows me to bring my a rook to d8 to apply more pressure to this pawn. And then eventually, my plan is going to be to get my bishop to target this pawn. Planning pawns. And the pawn on e6 and c6, whenever you don't have a target to attack, you should be thinking about like breaks like e5 or c5. But now we're just going to be keeping the solid pawn structure and just double up on the file and target his weak pawn. Queen c3 was played. That's an interesting move. Immediately, I noticed that his queen and his rook is on the same diagonal on a dark square. And if I could get my bishop to b4, that would be a nice skewer. So a move like queen to b6 immediately stood out to me. But let's first get all our pieces in the game first. We don't want it to be a case where we're just playing for tricks. We want when we create the threat, it really does something. Look on every piece that we have. You're not able to find a piece that's not really doing anything. That's how you want your middle games to look like. He plays rook to d8. He's trying to apply some defense here. Queen b6, knight c5, and I take, he takes. Queen b6, knight c5. I think he wants to play knight c5. And if I takes, I'm no longer going to be able to take. Pawn a5, I'm also thinking. Definitely not going to be taking there. Okay, I think I see the idea. I'm going to move my rook from d5. I want to get my knight to d5. So what I'm about to do is called clearance. Move the rook to a5. Why a5? It attacks the unprotected pawn. So I gain some time on that move. And then once he tries to guard the pawn, now I hit him with knight to d5, forcing the queen to move. And then once the queen moves, I am going to be exchanging his bishop because his bishop is the main defender of the d4 pawn. Once I'm able to get rid of the main defender of the d4 pawn, it's going to be way easy for me to start targeting this weak pawn. This is strategic chess, positional chess, solid chess 101. So he moves the queen out the way. Let's just eliminate the bishop. He has to take with the queen if he does not want to immediately lose the pawn. But even after he takes with the queen, our plan is to apply pressure to his weak pawn. So we are going to be playing rook back to d5, attacking these double pawns. I want you guys to notice how my entire game plan, the moment he pulled his bishop back to d2 and leave and double up his pawns, my entire game plan was to target those weaknesses. There are no good way for him to defend this pawn, by the way. That is a dead pawn. And the good thing about my position is once I get rid of this pawn, then the d3 pawn becomes the target because the d3 pawn becomes an isolated pawn. There's no pawns that is able to guard it. He moves his king out of the way. Let's take the free pawn. Now the d3 pawn is now our new target. So now we're going to be attacking the d3 pawn with all our pieces. We already have two of our rooks pointing towards d3. He pulls the knight to f2. That's an interesting move. I'm thinking bishop c5 here, just putting my bishop on the same line as everything. I'm thinking queen b6, putting my queen on the same line and attacking the unprotected pawn. Okay, first let's play queen to b6. Let's not rush. Let's play queen to b6. I was also thinking of bishop h4, but he's able to play pawn to g3. Rook to d2 guards the pawn. Now we're going to play queen to b3. Well, it does not attack the unprotected rook, but I'm just trying to fix all his weaknesses. And once I'm able to triple up on the d file, his d3 pawn becomes super weak. One thing, though, that I have to solve is I will never be able to take the d3 pawn if his knight stays on f2. With that being said, we know that minor pieces are the best defenders of weaknesses. So my plan is to find some ways to get rid of his knight on f2. And once I get rid of the knight on f2, the d3 pawn will fall. Okay, rook to d2. He's putting a lot of pieces on dark squares. I am paying attention to that. In fact, I want to hit him with bishop g5, but I do not have anything covering the square. So let's just start by playing h6. I'm threatening to play bishop to g5. He saw it. He plays g3 immediately, which means if I play bishop g5, he plays f4 and he's fine. But what I'm going to play instead is bishop to c5. So at least you could say I created loft for my king, but he's weakening his king a bit more. Now I'm threatening to just move my rook out the way, and his queen is going to be under attack. If he plays knight to e4 here, my bishop will be under attack. So I am going to be forced to pull the bishop back to b6, but my bishop will still be on a very active square, and it could go to a5 to attack this rook. So he decides to play queen to e5, but this is exactly what I wanted. Because all I'm going to do now is move this rook, put this rook on d5 and attack the queen, which means my bishop attacks his knight. And if this rook moves away to guard the knight, my queen takes his rook on d1, which means once I pull my rook back to d5, he has to guard the knight with his queen. So that way, once I take, he takes back with the queen. But then if he takes with the queen, I have too many pieces targeting his weak d3 pawn. If you want to be a good strategic player, then the Scandinavian could fit you. Queen went back to c3. Does not help. We're about to win more pawns. First of all, the goal is to win this pawn. So takes pawn takes, get rid of the knight. That's a removing the guard. Once the rook takes, we take on d3. And we're also forking both c3. Well, we're not forking f3. Well, let's take. After takes, that's a free pawn that I'm thinking of, but let's just get rid of the knight. And then once the rook takes, we take on d3. We're attacking the rook and this pawn. So now once we take, he has to guard the pawn, but we're already ahead by 2 pawns. And you should understand the types of endgames that you're going to be getting once you play this opening. He puts his rook on b2. One thing I want you guys to keep in mind whenever you are playing the endgame and you're on the winning side is the winning side do not want to be trading pawns. So maybe you're like, okay, I take his pawn, he takes my pawn, I'm already ahead by a lot of pawns, which would still be winning, by the way. But we want to ensure that we have good endgame technique. So let's play the move pawn to b3. Not trading the pawns, but we're going to be winning the pawns. My rook is attacking both of these pawns at the same time. He is forced to now lose one of them. He guards one of them. Let's take this one off the board. He attacks my rook. Let's put the rook back on the only open file on the chessboard. And then once he moves his king, now we start to get our king in the game. He attacks the rook. Let's just pull the rook back. If c4, then my rook gets the d4 square. Every pawn move creates a weakness. We know that. And if he attacks my rook, pawn c5 guards the rook. Rook c3 doesn't do much. Let's just play c5 to prevent him from playing c5. And then we're just going to be getting our king in the game. Remember, patience is very important in the end game. He does not have enough time to play this out, but Because I'm ahead by 3 pawns, this is just completely winning. I'm getting my king as active as possible. I have 4 pawns versus 2 pawns, which means I do have a lot of potential to create a pass pawn. Let's go pawn to g5. He took, let's take back. Now the plan is to play f5 followed by f4, but he lost on time. We're going to be playing more Scandinavian against 1500 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1500. e4, we play d5. They take the pawn, we take back, and after knight c3, hit them with queen a5. Okay, this guy plays d3. So first of all, d4 is better because, I mean, he's blocking out his bishop. But let's play our normal knight to f6 move. And then he plays bishop to d2. I want you guys to notice this little idea where they put their bishop on the same line as our queen. You have to ensure that you're looking out for it. Now we play the move c6. What's the purpose of c6? The purpose of c6 is the moment they move this knight, we're able to pull our queen back to c7. And eventually, you could choose to pull your queen back to c7. So knight to f3 was played. Let's develop our bishop. We would love to play e6. We would love to play knight to d7. Knight e4 was played. Our queen is under attack. Let's pull the queen back to c7. And now once the opponent takes on f6, it's a new structure, but we're actually not going to be taking with the g pawn. We're going to be choosing to take with the e pawn because it allows our bishop to get very quick development. For example, now he checks with his queen. I could just block with the bishop. So he's basically helping me to get my development off. He castles his king. I castle my king. But remember what we said about the Scandinavian. You could choose to play solid or you could choose to play aggressive depending on how the opponent plays. Because the opponent castled the king on the queen side and we castle our king on the king side, it will be an aggressive game. It has to be a crazy game. He needs to start playing moves like h3, g4 to attack my king side because I'm going to start my pawn storm on his queen side. Knight d4 is a very good move because I don't want to pull my bishop back here. But then if I pull my bishop back here, he has h4. So that's a very nice move. But let's pull the bishop back. I think we're forced to do it. f4 is also a nice move. So any f4 or h4 that he plays here, he plays g3 instead. And what we need to do here is finish our development. The queen is definitely highing my bishop. So if I play knight d7, he's able to take. So I'm thinking of just putting my knight on the edge of the board. Bishop c5, there's knight b3. Let's put our knight on the edge of the board. And remember what we said about knights on the edge of the board. Do not put your knight on the edge of the board so that way it stays on the edge of the board. The only time you put your knight on the edge of the board is if your plan is to remove it from the edge. So he plays bishop f4 and I already have to be careful. If I move my queen away, he's going to be able to take my bishop. So I'm actually going to play the move bishop to f4 here. Not only am I attacking his bishop, but if he takes my bishop and I take back with the queen, I gain the tempo on his knight. And because his queen is on this open file, I'm also going to be gaining another tempo with rook to e8. So he took, let's take back. His knight is under attack, so we're definitely in good shape here. Because I'm going to be playing the move rook to e8, hitting the queen. I'm also thinking of rook to d8, putting both of my rooks on the file. He pulls his knight back to f3, and I have a little idea. I have an idea, and my idea will work. Yo, I'm so good. Look on this. Look on this knight, guys. It's only being guarded by the queen. It's actually a weakness. So there's two ways how I'm going to be winning this game. The first way is I want to play the move queen to d5 to attack the unprotected pawn. And then if he plays king to b1, I play rook to e8, hit the queen. And then once he moves the queen away, which he will be forced to do, then I'll take the knight. The other move that I'm thinking of is to start with rook to e8, force him to move the queen, then I play queen to d5. He's going to be forced to defend the knight, then I take on a2, and I'm threatening a checkmate. Now, after really analyzing what's happening, if I play queen to d5, he's actually going to play c4 and attack my queen. And I'm going to be forced to move the queen. So let's start with rook to e8, gaining the tempo on the queen. And then once he moves away, now he has two unprotected pieces in his position. What did we see about unprotected pieces? They causes tactics. So hit him with queen to d5 now. Now he has to choose. Do I save my knight or do I save my pawn? He needs to save the knight. Like taking the pawn, they're both dangerous. But if you're gonna choose to lose the knight, then it's gonna be GG's. So at least save the knight Let me take the pawn and then try to find a way to defend. I mean, he's going to be getting checkmated though, but if he gives me the knight, it's just GG's. So we're expecting bishop to G2 here. We did play bishop to G2. Let's take the free pawn. Look on this knight chilling on the edge of the board. And I specifically said the knight should not stay on the edge of the board. But I was forced. Like, I couldn't have done anything else unless I don't want to take the free pawn. Now, once he prevents the mate that I'm threatening, it's now the perfect time to get the knight off the edge of the board. Look on this. Knight to c5. I'm threatening this fork on b3. If he moves the pawn, that's a checkmate because my bishop covers this diagonal. I'm threatening the fork and I'm threatening d3. I think it's now GG's because if he plays knight to d4 trying to prevent the fork, which is the move he did, my fellow viewers, yo, this is a nice mate. Hopefully you find the mate, by the way. Literally, okay, he's gonna sacrifice the queen, but let's assume that he does not sacrifice the queen. Knight takes d3 check. King can't go here. King has to step on the same diagonal as my bishop. Knight to b4, double check. King has to step back to c1. Queen to b1 is a check mate. Let's hit him with knight to d3. And if he sacked the queen, which he did not sack the queen, my fellow viewers, check. That's a double check, by the way. And once the king step back, that's just a checkmate. More Scandinavian against 1,600 players. Stick around. 1,600 opponent. E4, we hit him with the Scandi. And then once he takes, we play queen takes. This is where it begins. Queen to a5. At least we know the correct score for the queen. After knight f3, we actually don't want to be pinning the knight here because h3 and the opponent gets the bishop here. So let's just play knight to f6. We're going to be developing with the normal way, developing with the normal structure. Bishop to e2 was played. I guess he's trying to castle the king on the next move. If bishop g4, he's always going to play h3, so no need to play bishop g4. Let's put the bishop on f5. We're going to be getting our regular setup. He castles the king. Let's go pawn to e6. A pawn is going on c6. A knight on d7. A bishop on e7. Regular stuff. So a3, I see a lot of person play a3 because they're afraid of bishop to b4. For one, bishop to b4, you don't play a lot in the Scandi. You play it sometimes though. But let's just continue with our idea. We're going to play the move knight to d7 here. This is us just developing and continuing with our idea. Pawn to d4, we're able to play pawn to c6. And the thing about the Scandinavian is, I want you guys to notice how white has actually castled the king before us, but there's no immediate breaks that white is able to play that he could say, okay, let's keep his king in the center of the board. And now he plays bishop to d3. I think he should be more focused on getting the rest of his pieces out rather than moving the bishop to e2, then moving the bishop to d3. Because my queen guards the bishop on f5, I'm thinking of just playing bishop to e7 here. I mean, the solid move would be to take bishop e7, pawn b4. If I take on b4, he takes on b4. I take the rook, take the knight. Okay, let's go bishop to e7. b4 does not work because his knight is going to be unprotected. So he took, let's just take back, and we're going to simply castle the king. We get the regular solid Scandinavian setup. He plays h3, which is not a bad move. I personally think it's unnecessary. Let's get our king out the center of the board. All our minor pieces are out. Our king is castled. It's time to start paying attention to our major pieces. And the first thing I'm seeing is I'm able to play a move like rook to d8, putting my rook on the same line as the queen. There has to be some stuff that comes from this. So he got his queen off the same line as the rook immediately. Not bad. For some reason, I think he wants to put his knight on e5. We should not be afraid of a knight going to e5 though. I'm also thinking of pawn to c5, which is one of the thematic pawn breaks. Knight b6 to d5 is also something that we could go with. Let's go knight to d5 though. Let's go knight to d5, hit the knight. If they ever take on d5 whenever we play knight d5, we can always play the move c takes d5, opening up the c file for our rooks. So he did take, let's go c takes c5. We open the c file for our rook, and now we're able to play on the c file. So we don't want to leave the rook on d8 because it points towards its own pawn. Knight e5 was played. Another slightly inaccurate move because if I take the knight and he takes with the queen, he's going to lose a pawn because of the drawback principle. The queen will no longer be guarding the pawn. If he takes with his pawn, however, then he's basically just blocking the file that his queen and his rook is on. So let's just get rid of this knight. He has to take with the pawn, which he did. Now I'm thinking of moves like rook to c8, applying pressure to this pawn, bishop to c5, putting my bishop on the same diagonal as the king. But let's go with rook to c8. We want to ensure that we play with all our pieces. He plays pawn to c3. Now I'm going to play rook to c6. The plan is to double up my rooks on the c file. It is pointing towards a pawn chain though, so it's not the most active rooks in the world, but the c file is the only open file on the board, so I'm going to be using them. There are also some rook b6 idea targeting this pawn. The move I'm expecting here is bishop to e3. Okay, queen to g5. My opponent wants to trade all the pieces off the board and go into an endgame. But he's not aware that the Scandinavian is a solid opening, and we are, in fact, able to trade. So we're now in the endgame, and I get a lot of endgame videos requests. So if you're someone who wants to improve at the endgame, please pay attention. Whenever we're in the endgame, the goal is to attack the opponent's pawns. You have to ensure that you get all your pieces active first. G4 is his most advanced pawn in this position. So let's go ahead and play rook to c4, immediately targeting the opponent's pawn. Now we were able to get him to play a move like f3, which weakens this diagonal a bit. It also weakens this diagonal a bit. But in order for me to get activity for my pieces, I need to be able to do a pawn break. Moving your pawns forward in the end game, especially when you have a rook or a bishop to open lines for your pieces, will always be the way to go. So let's play pawn to b5 in this position. And what I'm about to do is called a minority attack. Whenever we have less pawns playing against more pawns, I'm basically trying to get rid of these two pawns. He's going to get rid of these two pawns, and he's going to be left with a weak pawn. So let's play pawn to a5 in this position. Another thing that you guys need to keep in mind is we do not rush in the end game. So I do not necessarily have to immediately hit him with b5, because if I play b5 now, takes, the rook could get the file. So let's try to prepare our idea as best as possible. So let's play rook to b8, pawn to b3. I will never be afraid of, because the moment he plays b3 and I move my rook, his c3 pawn is just going to be a backward pawn. So he plays rook to c1, fair enough, and our pieces are on good squares. Our bishop is on good square. The only piece in my position that I don't think is on a good square is actually my king. So I'm now thinking of getting my king in the game. I want to start by playing the move pawn to h6. I don't want him to play pawn to g5 and then get a rook on h8. Remember what we said? In the end game, it's all about patience. So we're going to be getting the king in the game. This is in fact a weak pawn that we can be, which can be attacked. He's getting his rook in the game. I'm thinking of d4 takes. Doesn't really give me that much, but you could say it helps us to infiltrate in his position. Let's go king to f8 though. Let's continue with our plan of getting the king in the game. This guy's not playing bad at all though. I'm not gonna lie, he's not playing bad. Pawn to b3. Pawn to b3 weakens both the c3 and the a3 pawn. So it's not a terrible move, but these are the little things that we're looking out for in the endgame. Let's just pull our rook back to c6 here. And then he plays b4. Now his c3 pawn is going to be permanently weak. If we take on b4, he's going to be able to take with the pawn, open up his rook, or take with this pawn, open up the rook. And one thing I want you guys to keep in mind when it comes to endgame is the winning side do not want to trade the pawns. So I think I'm on the winning side because a3 is weak, c3 is weak. This is an overexerted pawn. So I'm going to play the move pawn to a4, not trading the pawns, fixing the weaknesses in the opponent's position. Now he plays pawn to g3. Maybe he wants to play f4. Let's go rook to c8. The c file is definitely where all the action is going to be taking place, especially if I manage to play a well-timed d4. I'm not going to play d4 when I know that he's going to take those. So he plays f4. If he pushes this pawn, we don't have to react. So let's improve our position with rook to c4. We could infiltrate with rook to e4. We could play moves like pawn to d4, but it's going to be a slow grind. We're not going to be rushing in the end game. So he moves his king out the way. Now I'm going to play bishop back to d8, trying to put my bishop on a better diagonal. And this is why you guys need to understand weaknesses. His bishop on d2 is tied to d2. He moves the king to f3. Now I play bishop to b6, just putting my bishop on a better diagonal. I want to ensure that all my pieces are in the right place. So that way, when I hit him with pawn to d4, he feels d4. He goes rook to c2. I'm thinking of playing d4 now. Rook c1, I take. But then after he takes, he's going to want to trade all the pieces off the board, and that does not give me any advantage. With that being said, let's just continue to get our king in the game. So he did play rook c1. Again, I really want to play this d4 move. Okay, I am going to play d4. I'm going to play d4 knowing that his c pawn will never be able to take. However, I do not think it is going to be wise for me to take, because then if I takes, rook takes, it kind of simplifies the position, and I don't want it to be a case where I'm helping him to exchange his backward pawn. So I could say my pieces are doing the attacking role, his pieces are doing the defensive role. That's all we want. So he pulls the bishop back to e1. If we attack the rook is just going to move. If we take, the rook is just going to take. With that being said, I want to get my king in the game. But if I go here, then he's able to take. Okay, I need to look for some entry in his position. So I'm going to play the move pawn to f6. It's very important that you look for ways in which you could get your pieces in. So for example, now that he took with the pawn, his pawn no longer covers here. And now I'm thinking of getting my king active this way. But I don't really want to take with the pawn because it really weakens my h pawn. So let's actually take with the king first. As we said, patience is super important in the endgame. He has to ensure that he continues to play with very, very high accuracy. Okay, he moves the rook. He's allowing me to take the pawn. Not sure why. That's just a pawn. That's just drawback chess, by the way. Let's quickly take the pawn because I do not have a lot of time on the clock. If he plays rook to c2, then I go bishop to d4. So rook c2, he's attacking it. Let's go bishop to d4 to defend it. I have three defenders. He has three attackers. If he really wants to win the pawn, he has to play king to e2 followed by king to d3. So let's assume that he's going to play king e2. King e2 push. Okay, bishop to e2 was played. I could take king takes, but let's play pawn to e5. E5, if he takes king takes, then I'm activating my king. Or do I take with the bishop? Let's take with the king. I do not have a lot of time to think. Maybe he checks the king, but then I'm just going to move, and I'm not really seeing him with any more checks. Okay, let's move the king. Now, what I'm seeing is he has double pawns here, he has a backward pawn here, and I have a pass pawn here. Again, this is endgame technique 101. You cannot rush in the endgame. Rook to d5. That's okay. If I take king takes, I win the rook. If I takes rook takes, I push, and then I'm just winning. That's completely lost. That's where he made his blunder. Yeah, let's just take. The king is overworked, the rook is overworked, all of his pieces are overworked and in Zugzwang. And if he decides to take my rook first, then this was why it was important for us to activate our king, because now I'm able to take with the king. And I'm able to play moves like king to b3. So he took with the king, but now I'm able to play king to b3, attacking the rook, attacking this pawn, forcing his rook to move. Then I hit him with pawn to c2. Now, all I'm going to do here is he moves his king. I play king to b2, attack the rook. If he moves the rook, I just queen the pawn and I win the rook, which is what he did. Let's just queen the pawn. We win the rook, and this is just completely winning. So hopefully you learned something about the endgame. Now, all I'm going to do is take his pawns off the board, quickly queen my pawn, and he should resign or get checkmated in a few moves. Okay, let's just checkmate him here. So let's give a check. More checks. Usually you want to keep checking until it's a checkmate because you don't want to stalemate the game. Okay, let's give a check here. All right, now I'm going to go here because if he queens the pawn, he's getting mated. And if he doesn't do anything, he's getting mated. Now it's just mating to check. King has to go here, and that's a checkmate. More Scandinavian against 1,700 players. Stick around. Opponent is now 1,700, and he's from Kenya, representing the 1,700 players. We're going to be playing some Scandinavian defense, though. Okay, he plays d4. This is called the Blackmar Dima Gambit, by the way, where they just decide not to take the pawn and he's giving me a free pawn instead. So everybody's not going to be taking the pawn on d5, by the way. So it's very important that we're equipped with these lines. It's a free pawn at the end of the day, though. So we're definitely going to just take the free pawn. He develops his knight. Let's develop our knight to f6, and I'm going to try to ensure that we still keep the same plan and the same structure that we have been playing with. So now he plays f3. He's offering us another pawn. I am going to take the pawn. What I want you guys to be aware of is I'm ahead by a pawn, but white is ahead by development. So this by no means mean I'm completely winning, but it also does not mean white is winning. If white is able to keep my king in the center of the board, develop his pieces very quickly and start an attack, I will lose. If I'm able to develop my pieces very, very quickly and get a solid position, then I'm just going to be ahead by a pawn. So let's see who has the quicker development here. Let's go bishop to f5. We're going with the same exact structure, the same exact plan. The only difference is our queen is not on a5, but the queen can always go to c7 after you play a move like c6 followed by queen c7. Bishop to c4, he's developing. He's also spying on my f7 pawn here. So let's play pawn to e6. Once you're able to get the opponent's bishops to be pointing towards pawn chains, then you don't necessarily need to be worried about the bishops. Now, remember the move that we don't want them to play is pawn to d5. He has 1, 2, 3 pieces covering the square. I have 1, 2, 3 pieces covering the square. So technically, he could play d5 and get away with it, but his king is also in the center of the board as well. And if he castles his king now, then I'm going to hit him with the same c6 move, which he did. Now I'm going to hit him with this c6 move. So he did not get to castle his king. And then I'm going to quickly go bishop e7 and castle. So if he's not able to prove what he got from just giving me that free pawn, then I'm just ahead by a clean pawn. Knight e5 is definitely an interesting move. I'm not going to lie to anybody. If he plays knight e5, in a lot of lines, he's threatening to sack his rook. And then once I take, because of this diagonal pointing towards f7, he's able to fork back on d5. But he chose to play bishop to g5, pinning my knight. Let's immediately play bishop e7. And the next move, I'm gone. We're just gone out the center of the board. Quickly castle the king, knight d7, knight b6, knight d5. This is such a it's a very easy structure, and I want you guys to know exactly what to do with each of the pieces. Like, once you're like, okay, this rook, where does this rook go? Where does this rook go? Where do I put the queen? You know, that's how I want you guys to understand the line. So just know that there's always going to be a knight on d7 and f6. And when it's time for these knights to make progress, you're going to be seeing moves like knight b6 to d5 or just knight to d5, and then this knight going to f6. Your king is obviously going to be castled. The queen is going to either be on a5 or c7. A lot of times it's going to move from a5 back to c7. He plays knight to e2. Seems as if he's trying to play knight to g3 to attack my bishop, which is not bad. Like, he's trying to bring as much pieces as possible towards my king side to start an attack. But hey, I am gone. My king is now safe. He's one move away from completing his development, because development is complete when your king and your two rooks are the only piece on the back. He's playing a pawn move. That pawn move, I'm not sure what it does. I mean, he's trying to guard d4, but he already had like 3 pieces guarding d4. Let's play knight d7. The setup is finally complete. I'm not going to be able to put my queen on c7 due to this bishop f4 move. I mean, I could. Like, if you're going to play queen c7, always look out for this bishop f4 move. And if the bishop is able to get to f4, you should be able to meet bishop f4 with bishop d6. Knight g3 was played, hitting my bishop. Let's pull the bishop back to g6. And if I was able to pull my bishop back to h7, that would be a bit better, because he's able to play knight to h4 now and pick off my bishop here, which doesn't mean I'm losing or anything, but you guys know that I cherish my bishops. But he decided to trade the bishops instead. Now, I'm thinking, do I just say to take is a mistake and just don't take, let him take? Or do I take and then play h6? Because if I play h6, he's going to take and I don't want to take back. But if I let him take, then I'll never, ever, ever be able to play h6 ever again. So to take is still a mistake, but I am going to take and help his queen, so that way I'm able to play h6 and chase away his bishop. Very, very solid. Again, look on the structure. You're going to be seeing this structure a lot. I want you guys to also notice that we don't necessarily have to play a lot of pawn moves. You know, just be aware of this e5 and this c5 break, and you know what the plan is. That's how you learn one of these openings. Learn the setup. Yes, I know what the setup. Learn the plan. What's the plan? E5 and C5. Know what to do with your major pieces, because I already told you guys what to do with the minor pieces, and you've seen so many videos coming up to 1700. So what do we do with the major pieces? We know where the queen and the rook go, and we know all the moves. However, all we need to do is try to do all of this without blundering. How do we not blunder? Just look on the guy's last move. Look on all the possibilities in which they could put a piece in your half of the board. I don't mind if he gives up his bishop for my knight, to be honest. Like, I'm chilling if he does that. think he I thought he was gonna sacrifice his bishop. I wasn't scared of that, by the way. Like if you're watching this, Zoo from Kenya, I'm not scared of that. So his bishop went back. There's no pieces on my half of the board. I'm ahead by a clean pawn. All my minor pieces are developed and my king is castled. What do? We get the major pieces out. I was thinking of queen c7. I mean, why not though? I was thinking of queen b6. Do I put the queen on b6 or c7? Okay, I'm actually going to choose b6. The reason why I'm going to choose b6 is because it attacks the unprotected pawn. And keep in mind, I have no intention of taking this pawn. Because if I take the pawn and he plays rook b1, he's going to win back my pawn. But a lot of persons, the moment they see an attacking move, they don't ask themselves, is my pawn in any real danger? You know, they just guard the pawn. You see, he pulls his queen back. It's like wasting a move. But I was planning on putting my rook on the same line as his queen, so I wouldn't say it's wasting a move. But this rook could go on the same line as his queen. But let's start with the f rook. Let's put the f rook on the d file, and then we're going to play c5, and then we're going to put the a rook on the c file. So he moves his king off the same diagonal as my queen. That's a very good move, by the way. I was actually waiting for some tactics with the queen there. Okay, now if I play c5, takes, my knight is heading towards d3. This rook is coming over to c8, and we are chilling. Let's go c5. That's the plan. That's the pawn break. Now he plays rook to e1. He's putting his rook on the same line as our unprotected bishop. Remember, you guys need to be aware of this. Once the bishop is unprotected, our pawn is now not able covering this f5 and this d5 square. So he could get away with a move like, for example, knight to f5. But if he plays knight f5, I pull back to f8. His knight is under attack. Where does he put the knight? Not sure. Is he gonna sack? Maybe. Let's see. Let's go rook to c8. Let's put our rook on the same line as the queen. Like, I don't know. It's like once you reach a level in chess, this is the level in chess that I want you guys to reach to. I want you guys to reach to the level where you start feeling certain things. And when I explain this to my students, they don't understand, but you should be able to feel uncomfortable if your king is not castled, or if one of your pieces are just not playing. You should be able to feel on. You should be like, okay, why am I playing with all my pieces and then that piece is not doing anything? Look on all my pieces. Every single piece is doing a role now. All I need to focus on is optimizing what they're doing. Maybe I need to get this knight to the d5 square, but I can't say all my pieces are not doing anything. I'm not sure if I should say I'm scared of knight f5 or not. Because if he plays knight f5, I'm pulling back to f8. And again, I should not be afraid of this sacrifice. Because once I take, my bishop should be covering it. And I'm able to go bishop g7 and then knight f8. He moves his queen off the same file as my rook. This guy is not falling for any tactics, Mr. Zoo. Okay, if I takes, he takes with the knight. And then my knight gets the c5 square, heading towards maybe d3 in the future. I mean, I need to make some progress. I need to open some lines. I'm also thinking of playing bishop to d6, just threatening to double up his pawns, assuming he's going to play this. Let's just take though. Now, both of my rooks are on open files. Both of his rooks are also on open files, but I'm the one with the extra pawn. He's the one who decided to sack a pawn in the opening. So knight d4 was played. Which piece do I need to optimize now? I'm thinking of this knight. Knight c5. Knight c5, knight f5, we still play bishop f8. Still not scared. Oh, actually, I am very scared. Because if knight c5, knight f5, bishop f8, he takes on h6. And after I take on h6, I lose my knight on f6. With that being said, I need to solve this issue now. Question is, how do I solve it? Do I put the bishop on f8 or d6? I'm going to choose f8 so that way I'm guarding my h6 pawn. You guys are probably going to say it's a bit passive and d6 would have been a bit more aggressive. And if you say that, then I can't say that you're wrong. But knight c5 is coming next. I want to be the one who is attacking. So knight c5 to h5, hitting this pawn, or nah, we're not going to play e5. E5 allows a piece to get to f5. We have to cover the f5 square. Okay, now he plays rook to f3. Yeah, he's trying to attack me. This guy's trying to attack me. And I have to be a bit careful because I am sensing an attack coming on my king. Okay, let's continue with our plan. Okay, I don't think I'm able to move my knight because he's going to sack the bishop. I'm thinking of playing pawn g6 followed by bishop g7, putting my bishop on this diagonal. Generally, you do not want to be moving pawns on the side that your king is on. So whenever you're going to play a move like g6, you really have to confirm it and said, okay, it's not a blunder. Let's play g6. If he takes here, my bishop guards it. Bishop to g7 is coming next. And because I'm guarding this f5 square, I can also think of playing e5. So you double up the rook on the f file. Let's go bishop to g7. Okay, one thing I'm thinking of is sack the bishop, then take on f6, then take on f6. But if he does that, I'm going to have more material. He plays bishop to e3. He puts the bishop on the same diagonal as my queen. This guy is playing some chess. Okay, we know the drill. We don't necessarily need to calculate anything. The bishop is on the same line as the queen. Just get your queen off. So queen d6, there's knight b5. So queen to a6 it is, just applying some pressure towards his rook and his a pawn. At least I could say if he moves the queen, I'm going to win this pawn. Okay, now he plays pawn h3. He's trying to prevent knight to g4. But the thing is, I am able to play knight e. No, I'm not able to play knight e5 because of this. But what if I play knight e5 hits the bishop? Knight d5 hits the bishop. If he takes on f7, I take the bishop, then he takes on g6, and I resign. Okay, fair enough. Okay, I think it's time to play e5. We're going to play e5 and chase away the knight out the center of the board. A knight in the center of the board is too annoying. The good thing is, once I play e5, he's not able to go here. He pulls the knight back to b3. Very important that we check the forward moves for his pieces. I'm thinking of knight d5 still, but I do not want to lose my f7 pawn. I'm also thinking of knight f8 because there is no mate with a knight on f8. Knight f8 to e6 to c. Nah, that's bad. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, let's go queen to e6. Queen to e6 just brings my queen over in the defense. He pulls the knight back. Now I could play a move like knight d5 because my queen guards the pawn. So let's hit him with knight to d5, hit the bishop, and two rooks are more valuable than a queen, if anyone is asking. And to prove it, you just need to do some mathematics. So if he takes on f7, I may not take, by the way, because that's a free bishop. But all I'm saying is two rook is 10 points and a queen is 9 points. He has a minute 30 on the clock. I have a minute 51 on the clock. So this is good. I'm also thinking of f5. I think f5, if I play f5 followed by e4, I have the advantage. He has no more attack. I think if I play f5, he has to sack the knight to scare me. It's going to scare me, I'm not going to lie, but it's a knight at the end of the day. Let's see. And if he does not sack the knight, I'm going to play e4. And for the 400 player who is about to ask, why is this not a free pawn? If he takes the pawn, I play b6 and his bishop is trapped. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, let's play b6. Where will he put the bishop? Let's see. The bishop has no squares, by the way. And once I play rook to a8, the bishop is just going to be trapped. So I actually don't necessarily need to try to win the bishop right away. But he plays rook to e1. He's putting the rook on the same line as my queen. Let's be a bit alert there. This pawn is not really covering these squares. If I play this move, I should still be safe. So let's go rook to a8. Let's pick up that bishop. He sacked the bishop. Now we're just going to take. I don't think it matters how we take, so let's just take here. My e5 pawn is fully guarded. He plays pawn to a3. Now I'm going to play e4. That's the move we were thinking of. Very, very nice position. And he also has 47 seconds on the clock, so he's probably panicking right now. So he pulls the rook back. I want you guys to notice how this is actually an unprotected knight, and my rook is on the same line as the knight. So once I sacrifice on c3, it's called a discovered attack. And once the queen takes, then my rook is able to jump in and take the knight. And his queen is now not able to take my knight because it's guarded. From here, my a rook is attacking here. He plays knight to e2. I guess he's trying to put the knight on this square. Let's double up the rooks on the d file. If he plays knight to f4, I'm going to play, okay, he hits the rook. Let's go queen c6, apply some pressure to this pawn. If I could get both of my rooks on the second rank, that would be nice. Queen here. Let's jump in with the knight. This is just completely winning. He pins the knight. Let's just immediately get out of that pin. He moves the king. Let's go bishop e5. Let's check the king. And then once he moves the king, my knight gets access to the e3 square, hitting the rook. Moves the rook out the way. What to do, what to do, what to do. Okay, let's play pawn to f4, continuing with our attack. He moves the queen. Now I'm going to play pawn to f3. And if I'm able to get my rook there, that's a mate, but he plays knight here. My time is running out. Let's just take. And then once he takes, I take here. Okay, 12 seconds. He sacked the rook. Let's take with check. He has to move the king. Let's go queen c4. And then, okay, he took with the queen. Oh boy. Okay, let's check here. Let's force the queens off the board. And once we force the queen, oh my God, I have 5 seconds on the clock. I have 5 seconds on the clock. Oh boy. It's GG's. That's a checkmate. But more Scandinavian against 1800 players. Stick around. Our opponent is now 1800. Scandinavian. Once they take, we take with the queen. Remember, if you're going to be bringing out your queen early, you have to know where to put the queen. Queen to a5 is the score for the queen. And from here, you guys should already be understanding the regular development where we want the pieces. My opponent played h3 because he doesn't want me to put a bishop on g4. Now, based on my training, I don't necessarily need a bishop on g4. Let's just continue developing normally. Knight to f3 was played. I'm thinking about just playing e5 in this position. But then he plays d4, I play e4, force the knight to move, and it's like a completely different structure. So let's just develop normally and follow the structure that we're used to. Bishop to c4. We have to be careful about our f7 pawn. So let's play e6 so that way that bishop isn't really pointing towards anything. Once you know where to put the pieces, everything should be fine. And be aware of a bishop being on d2. So the opponent castled the king. And from here, I'm going to play the move knight to d7. Just developing normally. The pawn goes to c6. The bishop goes to d6 or e7, and then we castle on the king side or the queen side, depending on the position. But usually we're going to be castling on the king side. A3 was played, another prophylactic move. It doesn't really prevent bishop to b4. By the way, I just don't want to put my bishop there because if I put my bishop on b4 and pawn takes, I'll just take the rook. But let's continue with what we know. Pawn to c6, preventing any pieces from coming in. If we have to pull our queen back to c7, that's where we're going to be putting it. Pawn to d4 is what I'm expecting here. And then after pawn to d4, I'll develop. Rook to e1 is also a good move. He's trying to get all his pieces in the game, which is the principled thing to do. The rook is on the same line as my king, so I need to be a bit careful. I'm thinking of playing bishop to d6. Let's say he plays knight h4 or knight d4. I'll just pull back to g6 and I should be doing fine. But let's put the bishop on e7 just in case I have to quickly get my king out the center. So d3 was played, didn't play d4. That's interesting. Let's get the king out the center of the board. And this is the exact structure that you should be seeing a lot in your game if you're going to be playing the Scandinavian. And the bishop on d2 doesn't really pose a huge threat, by the way, because there's no discovered attacking square that the knight could go. But if you just want to be safe, just pull your queen back to c7. Again, here's the structure. That's where all the pieces go. This is the Scandinavian defense. And he plays queen e2, could say he's trying to connect his rooks. I want to be a bit careful here because a lot of times you guys need to be aware of this unprotected bishop on e7 and some tactics happening on this file. So the first thing I'm thinking about is the typical knight b6, hit the bishop, knight d5. I'm thinking of rook to e8, knight to h4 is a move that I'm expecting the opponent to play. I want to play h6, knight h4, bishop h7, but takes, check could be too complicated. I have to block with the rook. Unless it just does not work. Let's go with h6. Let's go with h6. The bishop on e7 is unprotected. There are two pieces on the same line as our unprotected bishop. So at least I'm aware of what's happening because this file could cause some tactics in the position. Knight to e4 was played. If I takes, pawn takes, my bishop will be under attack. Otherwise, if he takes, I will be able to take back. So I think it's time for me to just play rook to e8 or knight b6, hit the bishop, followed by knight d5. Knight could go to f4, hit the queen. Let's be safe. Let's play the safe rook to e8 first, so that way we're sure there's no tactic in the position. And as I'm telling you guys, with the Scandinavian, you have to be prepared to play both aggressive and solid at the same time. So he just played bishop to c3. He's applying some pressure to f6, but he did leave his f4 square with no defense. And there's this move, knight to d5. And having a knight on d5 will happen a lot of times when you play the Scandinavian. Now I'm attacking this bishop. I think he has to just pull the bishop back, by the way. Bishop c3 was a bit inaccurate, unless he wants to give me the bishop here. But even if he pulls the bishop back, two moves I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of going knight f4, hit the queen. And I'm also thinking of just playing knight b6, hit this bishop. Knight b6 hits this bishop, though. The bishop is just going back to a2. So I'm not really seeing much that I get from it there. So he did put the bishop back to d2, admitting his inaccuracy. Knight f4, there's queen e3, and I will be forced to move my knight. So let's go knight to b6. At least we're attacking. You know, when you're playing, if you could be forcing the opponent to be constantly pulling back their pieces, then that's a good sign. And I want you guys to notice, like, my last few moves was me moving my pieces forward, and the opponent was pulling their pieces back. So that's a sign that we're in good shape. Now, if you look on every single one of our pieces, they're doing something except our rooks. So this a rook, I'm gonna be putting it on the d file. For now, it's pointing towards a pawn, so I'm not really seeing much that it's doing. Knight f4, I'm really leaning towards. Let's just go knight to f4 here. Hit the queen. If he takes, I take. We have the bishop here. That's a slight advantage to work with. If he puts the queen on e3, though, thinking he's applying more pressure to my knight, then I hit him with knight to d5, and I'm assuming he's going to be giving up his bishop or play a weird move. Queen back to f1. That has to be an uncomfortable move to play. Look on this queen. He's just not giving up his bishop here. That's fine though. I'm thinking knight a5, hit the unprotected pawn, but just the regular rook to d8 that I spoke about earlier, just ensuring that I get all my pieces in the game. Knight to d5 is definitely coming as well. Rook to d1 was played. My opponent is also trying to get all his pieces active. And again, that's an unprotected pawn. But knight here, he attacks my knight. I get nothing. Knight to d5, I'm thinking of centralizing the knight. It allows pawn c4, though. But I could argue that I'm weakening the d3 pawn. I go back. There's d4. I get nothing. But let's go with knight to d5. We have to improve our pieces. If c4, I could say he's blocking out his bishop. Knight back to g3 was played. He's moving his knight away from the center of the board, so I have no issues with that. He is attacking my bishop though, so let's pull the bishop back to h7, maintaining this diagonal. My bishop is currently pointing towards pawn chains though. Whenever your bishops are pointing towards pawn chains, you should try to do something to make the bishop better. For example, his bishop is also pointing towards a pawn chain here. Bishop to f6, hitting the unprotected pawn, I'm thinking of. I'm also thinking of queen to b6, hitting the unprotected pawn. Knight to d5 is definitely a move. I'm just going to play bishop f6 anyways. Bishop f6, if c4 I take, bishop f6, I'm attacking the knight twice, so he doesn't really have anything that I should be afraid of. And if he moves the knight, I'm able to take on b2. This guy's playing very solid with the white pieces, by the way, but I think white is doing a bit, no, I think black is doing a bit better because this queen on f1 just has nowhere to go. And he's just not giving up his bishop here. So let's see how the game continues. He does have more time than me though, so that's definitely a factor. If he plays d4, trying to guard the knight, then his c2 pawn will be left unprotected. And being a Scandinavian player, people blunder their c2 pawn a lot for some weird reason. I don't know why, but keep that in mind. And I want you guys to notice how I got this position. It wasn't anything too fancy. I think the thing that I was doing mostly is just ensuring that I'm not blundering. Bishop takes d5 was played. He decided to give up one of his bishop here. I could take with the e pawn, and then if he takes here, I take here. But that's too drawish. I'm leaning towards just taking back with the knight, and he's going to be in the same issue. If he moves the knight, I take on. Yeah, let's just take. If he moves the knight, I take on b2. If he plays d4, I take on c2. Queen to e2 is definitely a move. Pawn to f4 is also a move. But what I'm seeing is the minute he moves the pawn to f4, the knight is unprotected. So bishop h4 is definitely a move. This diagonal is open towards his king. So queen to b6, checking the king, grabbing this pawn is definitely a move. Rook to b1, I take here the bishop. I am liking my position. Let's go with queen to b6. A pawn is a pawn. The opponent will make blunders. They will make mistake. If you just play solid and ensure that every single move they play, you see what changes in the position once they make that move. Let's just take on b2 now. The good thing is, if rook b1 and I take on c2, he's not able to take on b7 because his bishop is unprotected. So I could confidently say that I'm ahead by a clean pawn. So pawn c4 was played, hitting my knight first. The question is, where do I put my knight? There is knight c3, hit the rook, just grab another bishop. If he moves the rook, I take here. So I think he will be forced to take, and then his d3 pawn will be too weak. Yeah, let's go knight c3. Plus, we're ahead by a pawn, so the trades are good for us. But this is not just any trade. I'm trading my knight for his bishop. So that's another advantage that I'm getting. This pawn is now unprotected. This is backward. This piece is unprotected. These are the things that we're looking out for when we're playing the solid version of the Scandinavian defense. Bishop back to c1. I was not expecting. The guy is not giving up his bishop here. So eventually he has to move his rook. We know that. So we just have to find a safe spot for the queen. I'm thinking just queen back to, yeah, let's just pull the queen back to b6 so that way we don't have to worry about our queen getting trapped or anything. Rook to d2, I'm expecting. My knight I don't really like on c3 anymore. So I may just pull it back to a5 then to c5. Because rook d2, there's also bishop to b2 coming. Oh, wait, what? Knight to g5. I was not expecting that move either. Because he's just allowing me to take his rook. But then he's going to take and expose my king, and he's going to act as if he has some attack on my king. But if he wants to give me material, I'm going to take the material. Let's take that rook. If he takes on f6, we take back on f6. D3 is weak. Whenever the opponent has an attack on your king side, it's very important that you counterattack in the center. So that's what I'm going to do. So once he takes my knight here, I'm going to attack this D3 pawn with everything I have. The guy didn't even take the knight. Yo, this guy's playing super aggressive. All right, so what I'm thinking of is just queen to D4. Just guard the pawn, give him back the knight. Maybe I could even take this pawn. Okay, can I save the knight? Well, let's say we go knight C3. He check. Okay, let's not be greedy. Queen d4. Let's go queen d4. I have a minute 50 seconds on the clock. I'm guarding this. We need to neutralize the knight. That's crucial. Remember what we said about pieces on our half of the board. We don't allow pieces on our half of the board. So the fact that this knight is on h5, I'm assuming he's going to finally take back my knight unless he thinks there's some very fancy checkmate in the position that I'm not seeing. And I am also threatening to play knight to f2. So let's just say he plays the normal move and take back the knight. He did not take back the knight. The guy plays queen to f3. He's really trying to checkmate me with queen to g4. But if, first of all, if I check on f2, the king has to go here. I take here, hit the rook. If queen to g4, there is bishop to g6. Or do I have queen to f2? Okay, let's check. We save the knight. I'm ahead by 6 points. King h2 is forced. Now, after king h2, what if now is the time I play bishop to g6? Let's go bishop to g6. We don't want pieces on our half of the board. There's no bishop to b2 that I'm afraid of. Bishop to e3 is something. I mean, I was planning on sacking that knight anyways. If I take here, there is knight takes f6. If I take here, he takes here, I take here. Okay, how do we do this? I don't want him to take here, actually. So let's go to b2. Queen to b2. If he takes on f2, I take on h5, and he's losing material. I have a minute on the clock, so I can't be trying to play perfect move now. Let's just trade some pieces off the board and win the end game with the extra material. Queen to... Okay, rook to e2 is the move. That's what he needs to play. Rook e2. If I takes, queen takes. So rook e2, queen c3. Okay, he plays d4. Guy gone. Oh, he wants to take here. Okay, knight back to f6. Nice move. We save the knight. We guard our f6 pawn. We're now just ahead by clean 6 points. We're definitely going to be taking this knight next. And then once we play f5, there's the queen is the only piece that's going to be in our half of the board. Shouldn't be able to get at least a draw. Queen g5. Let's play f5. We were planning on playing that move. The queen just has to go back. Nice. Now we take here. exchanging the attacking pieces. Oh, I was thinking of playing here, but we have to go here to keep both of these two pawns guarded. Remember, we just want to trade. You're ahead in material, trade pieces, get pieces out of your half of the board. So knight back to f6 is also coming. Rookie to knight f6. Okay, let's go with knight f6. Hit the unprotected queen. He does not have any check, so he has to put his queen back on f3, and then I'm just gonna move my queen. Or I could take here, pinning his bishop to his queen. I'm just taking all his material, to be honest. Like it looks like he has an attack, but there's no attack there. Pawn push, I take this direction. Now it's opening up my rook. And if he takes, I could just sacrifice here. Okay, but why not? Oh my God, I do not have any time. Okay, I really do not have any time. Let's spin the bishop. I have 17 seconds on the clock. Okay, let's take. Now I'm trying to get the queens off the board. Okay, I'm going to take on d5 next. Bishop d4 doesn't work. Very nice. If he checks, I just take. His bishop is pinned. If he move the bishop, I take the rook. I'm going to be taking the bishop on the next move. It has to be GG's now. I just need to be able to do it quickly. Let's take. He has to take here. Let's take back. Okay, check. I have to move. Check. I have to move. Have to move. Have to move. 9 seconds. Are we pinning the queen next move? I think we have to block the check. Block the check. Check, I have to move. Once he allows me to start checking him, it's over. And he has 10 seconds. He's not fast enough. Check. Oh, that was bad. Oh, that was bad. That was bad. He gets a few checks now, but he doesn't have enough time. He doesn't have enough time. Good game, bro. More Scandinavian against 1900 players. Stick around. The opponent is now 1900. E4, we're going to be playing the Scandinavian defense. Okay, let's just take back with the queen, regular stuff. Preparing for knight c3, putting the queen on a5. And then after we broke that one opening principle where we got our queen out early, this is where we have to lock in and follow principles as best as possible. Knight f6 will always be the move after you move the queen. And then usually after you move the knight, you want to move this bishop. I've seen a lot of persons put the bishop on g4, but again, I do not want them to be chasing away my bishop because I already moved the queen more than once. So I'm going to play the move bishop to f5, just developing normally. Then I'm going to play e6, c6, knight d7, bishop e7, castle the king. That's the whole setup. Understand this, and you understand the Scandinavian. Now, the opponent decided to play pawn to d3. It's usually less aggressive. Pawn to d4 controls more squares. Let's play the move pawn to c6 first. It looks as if he's trying to put his bishop on d2. And you know the drill. Once the bishop goes to d2, just so that way I'm not worried about anything, I like to just pull my queen back to c7. The opponent castles, let's play e6 since he did not play bishop to d2. And now we're going to be focusing on getting our king out the center as quickly as possible. And just keep in mind that even though white is able to castle their king early, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're able to punish us or anything. So bishop to g5 makes a lot of sense. Bishop e7 or knight d7 is a potato type of situation. Like, for example, if I play bishop e7 here, the plan should be to play knight d7 next, unless I'm just going to castle on the next move. Plus, I also want to play h6 so that way my bishop is able to go back to h7 if the knight goes to h5 and attack the bishop. So just to remind you guys of the ideas in this line, whenever the knight goes to h5 to attack your bishop, you don't have to put it back to g6 to allow the knight to take, especially if you're able to go bishop g4 and attack the queen. He plays queen to d2 instead. Again, I could castle, but let's just continue with our development. Knight d7, just keeping things very, very solid. We're not going to be castling on the queen side here, especially since we already played this pawn c6 move. We're just getting our solid setup first. Now, because he plays pawn to b4, that's definitely an indication. Well, he plays a3. It's an indication that he's trying to play b4. And my queen coming back to c7, he could put his bishop on f4. And if I play h6 now, I'm assuming he's going to be putting his bishop on f4. And once he hits move b4, I will not be able to get access to the c7 square. And we like the c7 square. So let's play queen to c7. So that way, if he still decides to put his bishop on f4, we play bishop to d6. We have no issues. And these types of position is usually hard for white to play because there's no pawn breaks. So it's hard for white to create a plan. And it's actually easy for black to move around the pawns without actually damaging the structure or touching the structure. So rook to e1 was played. I'm thinking of castling knight h5 immediately attacks my bishop. So I want to play h6, but then bishop f4, I will have to go bishop d6, hit the bishop, and then after takes, there's no attacking move. And if knight h5, I go back to h7, and I should be able to castle my king safely next. So let's play pawn to h6. Very, very solid chess playing right here. Bishop f4, we saw that. Let's go bishop to d6. The rook is on the same line as our king, so let's be, let's just be a bit careful. I'm not really seeing how things could go wrong here. Like, I'm trying to see how he could sack his bishop, maybe takes, but then my queen covers the square. If he tries to move his knight to take here, then I take and they attack the queen. So he took first. Once I take back, I will just castle on the next move. If knight h5, as we said, we pull back to h7. Knight e4 could definitely be played if the opponent is trying to get to an endgame. But if he plays knight e4, I could either take the knight or I could just move the queen out of the way and castle on the next move. H3 looks like he's trying to prevent this, but I had no intention of putting my bishop there. So I think it would have been a bit better for him to go knight e4. Let's just get our king out the center of the board for now. You know what the drill is once our king is out the center? The goal is to start occupying the files, especially the d file. Whenever the pawn is on d4, then you're thinking about e5 and c5 bricks. But if the pawn is not on d4, you could just occupy the file with one of your rooks, play knight b6 to d5, and keep the ideas. So knight e4, if we take on e4, pawn e4, our bishop is under attack, we're forced to trade the queens, the bishop will still be under attack. So let's not make that trade because to take there will be a mistake. So I'm going to put my queen on c7, not e7. The rook is on the same line as the queen. If I put it on e7, there's a lot of drama that could happen there. My next few moves is like rook to d8, putting my rook on the same line as his queen. And then eventually I should be able to put a knight on d5, followed by putting a knight on f4. That's also an idea that I want you guys to use. So just to show you guys the ideas, there's knight d5 to f4, there's knight b6 to d5 to f4, and whenever you magically find a way to put one of your knights on d5, if the bishop takes and you take with the c pawn, now you could start an attack along the c file. So knight to d4 was played. My queen no longer guards the d4 square. He decides to jump in with his knight, and I have to be a bit careful here. For example, if I pull my bishop back to h7, he could sack his bishop, and then I takes, then he takes on e6. I will be forced to move my queen. Let's say I play something like queen to e5, he takes, I takes, and then he has a rook and two pawns for a knight and a bishop, which it's not the end of the world for me, but I'm not comfortable in that scenario. Again, if I take on e4, he takes, my bishop is under attack. So I'm thinking of just playing knight to, oh, we can't play knight e5. The bishop is under attack. So I think we have to respond to it by taking on e4. Wait, if I takes, he still is able to sack. Hmm. Now, you know what? I think I'm going to allow it. Because I was thinking of bishop takes and then after pawn takes, just play some normal moves. But I want to allow his sacrifice to see his ideas. Now I'm thinking of, do I put the bishop on g6 or h7? Let's go to h7. Now, the more threatening move that I think he has now is to sack his bishop on e6. And then after he takes on e6 again, forking my queen and my rook. But then my plan from there is to play queen b6, hit the pawn. And then if he takes, I play rook f8. And now I'm applying a lot of pressure to his position. So he will have a rook and two pawns, which is 7 points. I will have a knight and a bishop, which is 6 points. But the thing is, a knight and a bishop usually just always beat the rook. So he did not go for that idea. He plays rook to e3. Now I'm really thinking of just knight to d5, and that's a tempo on the rook. Knight d5. I'm assuming his idea was to do a rook lift anyways. I'm thinking of just playing queen to b6 now in one move. It's the unprotected knight and it hits this unprotected pawn. So that's also another idea. Queen f4 is also an idea that I have here. And obviously, I'm trying to put one of my rook on d8, but I still think he wants to sack. So let's go queen to b6 first. Let's go queen to b6. Now, if he sacks, he's not going to be winning any material. So I don't think sacrificing is good for him. I'm expecting pawn c3, which guard the knight and b2, or I'm also expecting knight back to b3 here. If he takes on f6, we're always going to be taking back. Very, very solid situation. And I want you guys to keep in mind that I'm not really making a lot of pawn moves, and I'm able to play the position without moving the pawns until in the end game. And you don't really want to be playing chess making a lot of pawn moves anyways. So knight to b3, unless you're doing a pawn storm. Knight b3, I takes, pawn takes. I don't really gain much. Knight takes, knight e5, hits the bishop, force the bishop to move. Then I'm able to play rook to d8, hit the queen, force the queen to move. So that's definitely an idea. I'm not seeing how I gain a lot from that. So we don't have to rush doing that. So let's just use the time to get to a rook in the game. The rook is on the same line as the opponent's queen, so that's always a plus. Knight d5 will always be fine. And knight e5 hitting the bishop is also an idea. Queen to a5 is something that I'm thinking he could try if he wants to go to the endgame. But we know how to play these types of endgames. He take on f6, we're always going to be taking back. We're not trying to double up our pawns or anything. And then now he plays rook to g3. So after a move like rook to g3, his rook is on the same line as our king. So we have to be careful about that. We don't want the opponent rooks on the same line as our king. So let's just get our king out the way. He was also threatening to play the move queen takes h6 because my g7 pawn was pinned. So now once I get my king out the way, there's no real threats in the position. I think all my pieces are okay except my f8 rook. So from here, I'm thinking of moves like rook d7, rook d8, double up on the d file. Okay, I think I just missed a fork, which was embarrassing because my rook was on the same line as the queen as I was talking about. I mean, he still fell for it, but I don't like to miss moves like that because now I'm able. The whole idea was to play knight e4, and then he's not able to take because he loses the queen. Putting his rook on e1 does not help the situation because I'm still able to play the move knight to e4. So after knight e4, if he moves the queen, we take the rook. After knight e4, if he takes with the rook, we simply take back the rook. And the good thing is his d pawn will be pinned. So we still get to gain some material by using tactic, but you still don't want to be missing moves, especially at the higher level, which is why whenever you watch games and even when persons like Hikaru, they win their game, but they don't really seem pleased in winning the game because usually you want to win a more clean game, if that makes sense. But this is now just winning. We're ahead in material. The goal from here is to start trading pieces off the board. So he sacked the rook. That's the move that we were expecting. Let's take back. And then he take here. Okay. So he's basically allowing me to take the queen, and then he's basically saying he has a knight and a rook for my queen. That doesn't make any sense though. That's bad. All of that is bad. This is not just completely winning. The knight is unprotected, so I'm thinking of queen d4, hit the knight. I mean, that's just a free pawn, to be honest. Let's just take the pawn. And then once I take the pawn, I'm threatening to take this pawn actually, because if I check, he's able to block with the knight. But my plan is just to get my rook on the d file and just play some chess. And one thing that I want to emphasize is how we're not making a bunch of unnecessary pawn moves. So bishop to b3 was played. He's guarding his c pawn, but by pulling the bishop back to b3, the rook no longer guards the a pawn. And now I'm able to just take the a pawn. And yes, I'm putting my queen on the same rank as the rook, but if he tries any weird discovered attacks, I will be able to check his king and then take whatever free material he offers to me. Another move I'm thinking of is rook to d8, attacking the knight, knight back to f1, and then I play rook to d1, pinning the knight. I'm assuming he's going to play knight to c4 though, so let's just take the pawn. So he did play knight c4. Let's just check on c1. Let's force the king to move. Queen to f4 pins the rook to the king. I'm also attacking this unprotected pawn. h5, h4 would be a nice idea, but that's definitely going to be a bit too slow. Yeah, just pulling the king back. That's what I was expecting. But now I'm able to play the move rook to d8, finally getting my last piece in the game. So if you guys want to know what to do, here's the thing about the Scandinavian. You know what to do with all your pieces. What do you do with the rooks? You put them on the d file, you try to double up on the d file. What do you do with the knight? They either support each other on, well, my opponent resigns. More Scandinavian against 2,000 rated player. Stick around. Your opponent is now 2,000. E plays e4. Let's finish our solid Scandinavian. So he took the pawn. Let's take with the queen. He attacks the queen. The queen moves to a5, and we're going to be super solid this game. Knight to f3. Let's develop the knight to f6. B4, that's the main move. And we know that we need to go bishop to f5. So everything that we're seeing here, we're completely used to. Bishop to d3, I've seen a lot, which he did play. Let's play pawn to e6. And the whole idea is if he takes on f5, which he quickly did, we simply take with the queen, and our queen is not in any real danger. Eventually, from f5, our queen can always move back to a5, then to c7. Because obviously, we're going to be playing moves like pawn c6, knight e7, bishop e7. Or sometimes we could play bishop to d6 to prevent this knight from going to e5. Queen to e2 looks like he wants to check on b5. So let's play the move pawn to c6, which is one of those moves that we play anyways. So, which is what I say the move order doesn't matter, the setup does. But this guy's 2080. So the move order may matter a bit. So bishop to e3 was played, and looks like this guy's castling on the queen side, and that's very, very interesting. Now, because he's trying to castle on the queen side, I may just hit him with this bishop to b4 move. Bishop b4, he plays a3 though, and takes knight e4, and his knight becomes very, very weak. So, do we pin the knight? Do we wait until he castles, then we pin the knight? Hmm. Let's see. Let's go knight d7. Let's keep our options open. This is called, being flexible. If he still decides to castle on the queen side, I may go bishop b4. I may go queen a5. Then he plays h3. So h3 is either him trying to play g4 to start an attack on my king side, or he's trying to prevent my knight from going to g4. If he plays g4, the queen goes back to a5, followed by e7. Now it's time to really move my bishop. And the thing is, I do not want to give up my bishop here. So if he plays a3, I may just put my queen back on a5. So let's go bishop to b4. Let's put the bishop on b4. Eventually, I think I'm going to pull my bishop back to d6 or e7, by the way. I'm just trying to ensure that he doesn't castle on the queen side. But then he plays bishop back to d2. Bishop d2 is one of those famous blunders where, I mean, at the 2000 level, it's a blunder. The 500 ELA guys is going to be like, oh, it's just a pawn. But keep in mind, the c2 pawn is like the first pawn that people blunder in the Scandinavian for some weird reason. Pawn is a pawn at the end of the day. Let's take the pawn. I'm assuming he's going to castle, but that could be another pawn. But then he chooses to play a3 to attack my bishop. But what if I do not move the bishop and I play queen takes b2 though and attack the rook? And then he plays rook to a2 and then he guards the pawn. My queen is under attack and my bishop is under attack. Guy's trying to trick me, which is crazy. I'm ahead by a pawn, so I'm deeply considering to just get rid of the knight, get the queens off the board, and win the endgame. You guys know how I play the Scandinavian very solidly. But I'm also thinking of just pulling the bishop back to d6, just keeping the bishop. And eventually, once he attacks my queen, just pull the queen back to f5. So those are my two options. And I am not going to be playing no pullback game. So we are going to be giving up our bishop for a knight. And the reason why I'm doing that is because one, I'm ahead by a pawn, and two, this dark squared bishop is not as active. So let's get the queens off the board. And then once he takes with the king, we are in the end game. So castle is not like super important. But because he still has this knight on the board, I don't want to play something like getting my knight to d7. But maybe I don't need to rush castling. That's the thing. Because whenever you're in the end game, you kind of want to play with your king. So I wouldn't want to castle and then have to get my king in the game. So that's something I need to be flexible about as well. I'm thinking of knight e4, get the bishop off the board, and then play king to e7. If I play king to e7 first, he may have bishop to b4 check. Hmm. But the question is, do I play knight e4 or do I play knight d5? Knight d5, the bishop gets okay. It's knight d5 because from d5, this is like the strongest knight. There's no pawn that is able to attack it, and there's no bishop to b4 check. With that being said, we do not have to castle, which is very good news because we're in the end game, guys. Come on, remember, castling is important, but when you're in the end game, the king becomes one of those pieces. So we're not trying to castle in the end game. We're trying to ensure that our king becomes one of the main attacking pieces. Now, one issue I may have, not gonna lie, is I may also need to open the position. And once I start opening the position, then his bishop may become a bit more active. That's something that I didn't really think of. But let's just continue with what we know. Let's go rook to d8, getting one rook on the d file, rook c8, getting one rook on the c file, and then play for an eventual c5 because he's trying to castle his king artificially. Let's go rook to c8 here, and then I'm going to try to play c5. The thing is with c5 is, yeah, I was about to say I'm going to be getting rid of his isolated pawn, but he doesn't even want me to do that. So he plays b4, immediately preventing c5. So now I'm thinking, do I try to get my knight on the c4 square? I mean, knight b6, there's rook c1, preventing that. Hmm. Or do I play b5? If I play b5, then rook c1, and then my pawn is backward. I'm thinking of b6, c5. With that being said, I'm really trying to open the position with my king here, which is tricky. So b6, rook c1, c5 takes, 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 and I should be safe. Let's go b6. We have to play c5. And keep in mind, whenever you're in the end game, the winning side does not want to trade pawns. The reason why I'm trading pawns is just so that way I can get my rooks in the game. So b5 takes, 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 rook takes, takes, knight takes, knight e5, and I'm safe. Let's hit him with c5. I'm not going to be trading a lot of pawns, by the way. Like, once I'm able to ensure that my rooks are active, then that's it for the pawn trades. Because when you're in the end game, and you're trying to win, the pieces is what you trade, not the pawn. And there's also a rule in chess that says when winning, trade pieces, when losing, trade pawns. For example, even though I'm ahead by a pawn, just imagine what would happen if every single pawn comes off the board. I'm only going to have one extra pawn. So he plays b5, which is a very interesting move because now if I take this pawn, his knight takes, and then his knight is heading to my weak c6 square. With that being said, I'm thinking of playing pawn to c4. Pawn to c4 threatens pawn to c3. Hmm. Okay, that's what I'm thinking. I also like the idea of king to d6. Like putting my king on a dark square with him having a dark squared bishop on the board is definitely risky. And I also like the idea of rook to a8 followed by a6. There's a lot of things that I like here. But let's play pawn to c4. Definitely pawn c4. No, there's only one potential for his knight, and that's putting it to e5. And I don't think I'm moving my d7 knight anytime soon, to be honest. If he puts his bishop on d3, we get rid of the bishop, and our king is going to be just a bit more safe. And you guys know how I feel about pass pawns. Oh, I only have 3 minutes on the clock. We can't be joking around playing against a 2008 rated opponent. So I definitely have to ensure that I speed up a bit. So let's calculate on his time. If the bishop goes here, I quickly and immediately take the knight f6 to d5, hit the rook, push the pass pawn. But then his knight comes to e5 and then c6. We cannot allow that. So bishop to b4 check was played. Okay, if I takes it, double up his pawns, but then he gets access to attacking my weak pawn. So takes, push the pass pawn. Okay, I don't think I want to take that bishop. I think it's the right thing to do though. Takes, knight f6, knight e5, knight e5, check. Okay, let's not take. Let's not take. Let's go king to f6. It's very tricky. I'm not gonna lie, it's tricky. Look on my king. My king is actually not in as much danger as it looks. Like my whole idea was to get rid of the bishop and then give him this ugly double pawns. But if I do that, then just idea of his rook being on the a file attacking my backward pawn doesn't sit right with me. Like if I'm able to play like rook c7, rook c8, like just safely guard the pawn, then I'll do it. So bishop d6 was played. Looks like he wants to put something on e5 in the future. Okay, now I'm thinking of just pushing my pass pawn up the board. Anything goes on e5, I'll just take. And if pawn takes, I go king over. With that being said, pass pawns are still being pushed up the board. If bishop to e5 check, I wasn't expecting bishop e5. Bishop e5 takes, knight takes, and then he gets access to my c6 square. The thing about my position is I have weaknesses as well. Okay, rook c2, he's blockading my pawn. Remember, we have to play fast. The moment I move this knight, the bishop goes to e5. Okay, let's go rook to c4. With some ideas of playing rook to a4, we have to get some activity. I'm also thinking of rook to a8 followed by a6. And Okay, now I'm really liking that idea if I'm trying to win this game. Because we have to find some ways to get some entry in the opponent's position. Now, if he plays bishop to e5, that's even strong. Because after takes, knight takes, my rook is under attack. And if I takes this pawn, knight c6 is a 4. So check takes, knight takes. Check takes, knight takes. And then maybe I have to play rook c7. And then if knight c6, I play a6. a5 takes. Okay, rook here was played. He's not, I guess he's just not seeing the idea. Guess he's just not seeing the idea. Knight d2, not possible just yet. Let's play the move g6. So that way, just in case he checks on e5, and I don't want his knight to take, I'm able to just move the king, and he's not taking my pawn. We're going to be very, very patient in the endgame. But we have to play this endgame a bit faster. We're ahead by a pawn, but it's not clear. So he plays knight e5. I'm actually... Wait, can I just take... No, let's take the knight. I think I'm better. I'm better off doing it like this. And then after he plays pawn takes, I take like this, and then I'm going to get access with the open file. I prefer this position because my knight on d5 is just so, and then he took with the bishop. That's also bad because now I'm able to play king e7 followed by f6. Yo, he's playing the endgame not so good. Like my knight on d5 is so good. Like I could literally do anything with my two rooks. I don't have to worry about, oh, I can't move away my rook because I'm gonna lose my pawn. This has to, and the other good thing is my knight on d5 protects this pawn. So once I'm able to play a6 and takes, I'll really get the open file. Look on this, rook to a5, attacking weak pawns in the endgame. He's not gonna sack his rook, obviously. I mean, maybe, but I'd take it. And again, if you have to have your rooks pointing towards a pawn like this, it's bad. If you have to have your rooks pointing towards your own pawn like this, then it's also bad. Okay, now do I play rook a5? Okay, let's play rook c8, then rook here, push, rook here, rook here. Okay, let's just continue with the plan. Let's go rook a8, then I'm going to push, takes. But then he's still able to play rook to a2, so it's not going to be easy. It's really not going to be easy. Okay, so, ooh, he blundered. That's a fork. Okay, let's think. Check. Has to take the knight, take the rook, winning. Yo, he blundered. What the heck? Check. If he takes, I take the rook. If he takes the knight, I take the rook. That's crazy. Tactics. Oh, he took this way. That's even worse. Wait. Check here. If the king goes here, I take this rook attacking this rook. What is my G doing? Check here. So no one he moves thinking, oh, I'm attacking his rook. I'll take and attack back his rook. So now I take hitting this rook. So if I'm just ahead by an entire rook, it's crazy. Okay, I have 56 seconds on the clock. We have to lock in and win this game. Tell you guys about the end game. Please make more end game videos. Please make more end game videos. Are you guys not learning from these end game techniques? I'm going to be making videos directed towards end games, by the way. But hopefully these videos are giving you guys a general understanding of how to play in the end game. He plays rook. I'm thinking of just sacking here. Takes. Nah, that's just being a coward. Let's go here. I'm ahead by an entire rook. I guard my pawn. I'm gonna take on d4, and that's gonna be another free pawn. 48 seconds is a lot of time to convert this into a win. Pawn a4. Let's take with check. If he trades, then I'm good. Trading is good for me. We love trades. Oh, no, I check here. If king back, we get the queens off the board. So he has to go king up. Okay, he did play king up. What do we do? What do we do? Okay, now let's go here. I'm threatening mate. And if he takes, I take back, and I'm still threatening mate. So let's take back. That's a checkmate. If he checks, I move the king. Oh, he attacks the pawn. That's just a checkmate.